Good morning and welcome to our webinar, Helping Schools Help Students. We are so glad to have such a good turnout for the event. My name is Stephanie Krantz. I'm a senior attorney at the Disability Law Center, and I specialize in education issues. This webinar is co-sponsored by EdLaw, TASH, Parents Professional Advocacy League, Massachusetts Advocates for Children, the Federation for Children with Special Needs, and the Massachusetts Down Syndrome Congress. I want to thank my planning team, Tim Sindelar, Emily Lamarca, and the DLC team, Amanda Gasparonis and Caitlin Walsh, who made all this possible. We have a very full agenda today, so I will provide a short overview of the morning and some housekeeping tips for the day. I want to start by acknowledging
This meeting is being recorded.
that these are very difficult times in education. Our hope is that these hours together will provide meaningful resources to prepare for the new regulations and support educators and students. For some background, DLC started working on timeout room issues in 2019. Over the years, I have monitored schools across Massachusetts that includes public, collaborative, and improved special education programs. I spoke to educators, administrators, parents, students, and providers, and I have found that there's consensus that trauma-informed alternatives are needed and that educators are looking for this training and support. I then connected with Tim Sindelar and Emily Lamarca and other advocacy organizations, as well as reaching out to DESE. In 2021, DESE issued an advisory to reduce and eliminate timeout room usage. This document highlighted the need for alternative practices. The lingering question was what would schools use instead and how these changes would occur. You can't take something away without replacing it with an alternative. Schools are looking for guidance, training, and support. DESE has released 2 rounds of grants, one in 2024 and one in the second in 2026. The hope is that the additional rounds of funding will be released to facilitate these needed changes in practice. DESE also convened stakeholder meetings, which I participated in that process. And at the conclusion, DESE submitted proposed regulations to the board, and they were released for public comment. In 2025, the board approved the final version of the regulations that go into effect in August of 2026. DESE also issued guidance to help schools with the transition process. This gap allowed time for schools to change practices, policies, and culture and learn about alternative practices that work. Our hope is that this webinar will help with this process. We will start this morning with a presentation by Guy Stevens, the founder of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. And next, Tim Sindelar will provide an overview of the new regulations, and Emily Lamarca will provide a personal story. We will then have a short 10-minute break, and then 6 vendors will share alternative approaches to restraint and seclusion practices. This includes Lives in the Balance, Grafton, Think Kids, Revelations in Education, the Regulated Classroom, and Justice Resource Institute. We understand the change is hard, but hopefully the information provided today will provide concrete tools to move forward. Here are a few housekeeping tips for the day. If you're having technical issues, please use the Q&A feature to reach the technical team. If you have content-related questions or feedback, please respond to the registration email or put a comment in the Q&A, and we will follow up after the event. Everyone who registered for the event will get a recording and materials sent by email. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to staying connected and collaborating on this important topic. I would like to now welcome Guy Stevens as our keynote speaker today. He is a nationally recognized expert on restraint and seclusion, and the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, a national nonprofit working to transform school discipline and create safer, more equitable schools for all students and staff. Through AASR and a national partnership with the Crisis Prevention Institute, Guy helped develop Reframing Behavior, a school-wide training program grounded in neuroscience, that helps educators prevent crisis and build positive, supportive learning environments. He promotes trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned, neurodiversity-affirming, relationship-driven, and collaborative approaches, and frequently presents at conferences, universities, and in the media on restraint, seclusion, and punitive discipline. Guy serves as board president of the ARC of Maryland, is a founding board member of PDA North America, hosts the AASR Live podcast, and regularly testifies across the country, including before Congress, in support of legislation to reduce, restraint, and eliminate seclusion. His advocacy is deeply informed by his experience as a parent advocating for appropriate supports for his neurodivergent son and his belief that embracing neurodiversity and neuroscience is essential to creating safe, inclusive environments for all. Welcome, Guy.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's great to be here, and I appreciate your introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and just get my slide deck up. And if all goes well, in just a moment. All right, we should have my slides up on the screen. So if anyone can tell me if you're not seeing my slides, that would be great. And Stephanie, I appreciate the kind of the introduction. And as you were talking, I was listening to you kind of talk about the if not this, then what? And this is really the theme of what I want to talk about today. This is a question we hear a lot, is if we're not going to use restraint, seclusion, timeout, then what do we do? And want to talk during the time I have this morning about alternatives and what we can and should be doing instead, but also from the perspective of understanding the challenge. There are a lot of challenges facing educators in classrooms across the country, and Massachusetts is no exception to that. So I appreciate the introduction. I'm happy to be here today. You did a wonderful job introducing me, so I'm not going to say a whole lot more about myself. Other than, my children have been the inspiration for a lot of the work that I do. This really began because of a journey that I had with my son. In fact, if you went back, to 2018, my life was in a very different place. I wasn't coming to conferences and events and advocating for disability rights. I wasn't presenting at things like this. I actually worked in a very different field. But we had a lived experience that kind of changed everything for me. And while I'm not going to tell you the whole story today, I'll share with you that as a father of actually two neurodivergent children, I have had some experiences that led me to this moment in time. And back in 2018, my autistic son, was physically restrained, secluded, and traumatized by it. And that led to a lot of reflection, a lot of conversation. Ultimately, it led me to having a conversation with my son about what had been done to him. And ultimately, if you looked at what the state law said in my state, I live in Maryland at the time, my son should never have been physically restrained and secluded, but it happened to him. It had a tremendous impact. What started my journey was a conversation I had with my son where I told him, this is not okay. What was done to you was not okay. And I made him a very simple promise that I was going to do whatever I could to make sure this didn't happen to him again or other children like him. That led me down a road of doing a tremendous amount of research, connecting with people from all over the world, trying to figure out not only who was being impacted by things like restraint, seclusion, and timeout. I wanted to understand what the impact was, and I wanted to understand what we could do differently. And through that journey, I've actually met a number of the amazing people that you're going to meet later today, and have been advocating for the kinds of changes necessary to create better outcomes, not just for children, but also for teachers and staff as well. So through my journey, I found that there were many children who were chronically misunderstood in the name of behavior. And misunderstood children were far more likely to end up on the other side of a lot of punitive and exclusionary discipline, on the other side of restraint, seclusion, and timeout, and ultimately found that there are better things that we can do. Following the experience with my son, I began a small nonprofit called the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint in early 2019. I don't think when I started the Alliance, I really had a vision of where things would go, but I started the Alliance initially to share information. I wanted others that were going through a similar situation to know that they weren't alone. I also wanted them to know that they could influence change. very early in my journey, I began working with our own Board of Education and our own superintendent to ultimately influence a change in policy and practice to bring in new training and new ideas and vastly reduce and eliminate the use of restraint and seclusion in our district, which it turns out at the time was doing these things at a far greater rate than many around our state. So I started the Alliance in the spring of 2019. We're, as I said, a small national nonprofit. We're a community of probably over 35,000 parents, caregivers, self advocates, teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, occupational therapists, attorneys, advocates, many people. And that's intentional because I believe in bringing people together to really explore what we need to do to bring about changes that will improve outcomes. And I know we can do this work. A lot of our work focuses on schools, but we've worked with partners who have worked in areas like residential settings, behavioral health, acute psychiatric settings, even forensic prison settings, where they have successfully eliminated practices like seclusion and reduced the use of restraint. Our work and our mission is really about reducing the use of punitive and exclusionary discipline and hopefully having an impact on the school to prison pipeline, because that's a very real issue facing many of the children who are often misunderstood in the name of behavior. So a little bit more about what we do, and I'm going to dive right into the presentation after that. The Alliance focuses on three major areas. We focus on legislation, education, and support. On a legislative front, as Stephanie mentioned, we've worked with lawmakers across the country to try to get better laws and policies in place. I've worked with federal lawmakers as well. We've worked with school districts. We work with boards of education and others, really in the vein of how do we change policy and practice. Most of our work falls under the education umbrella. We do a lot of conferences and events. We have our own virtual events that we do as well. We offer professional development and training. And a lot of the work is really focused on how do we shift to better ways of supporting children and move away from these approaches that we know aren't working. And finally, we do some individual support. That looks like supporting parents, caregivers, self-advocates, educators, others who may have concerns around the use of punitive and exclusionary discipline, or might be in the process of trying to change systems, whether it's a school that their child's attending or a school where they work. And we try to offer help and support to bring about positive changes. I do want to share with you, and this is really important, a framework of beliefs. When I first began doing this work, one of the questions that I was asked early on was the question we're going to address today, which is, what do we do instead? And I think the first time somebody asked me that question, I don't know that I had a great answer, but I began doing a lot of research. I began connecting with a lot of professionals, a lot of self-advocates, a lot of parents and educators, and trying to figure out what was the answer to that question. Through that journey, I met a lot of amazing people, some of whom you'll be meeting today, and really began to explore what are the elements to help us to move away from restrictive practices, to move away from restraint, seclusion, and timeout. And over time, we developed what I call the five principles. And this is an idea of, if we want to think about what we need to do differently, it's really about going upstream. It's about changing what we're doing that's leading to the moment of escalation or big behavior. And in my view, the things we need to do are really bringing into our classrooms approaches that are trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned, neurodiversity-affirming, relationship-driven, and collaborative. It's understanding the impact of trauma, how trauma changes the brain. It's seeing behavior through the lens of the brain and nervous system. You'll be treated today to Lori Desautel's joining us. A lot of work centered in this area. It's about neurodiversity affirming approaches, moving away from deficit approaches. It's about relationships and collaboration. And these are all keys to what we do instead. So with that, I want to launch off here with one of my favorite quotes, and this is from Maya Angelou. This work is not about shame, blame, or judgment. It's about how do we know better and how do we do better. When I first started this work, I began really trying to explore what are the things that we can do, and found so many options of things that we could be doing differently. So this quote really sums up the core beliefs that we have in this work. Do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. This is about a journey. I am very excited to see the work that's been done here by all of the partners that Stephanie mentioned, the work that's been done by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, really to shift us into knowing better and doing better. And that's what our event is all about today. So, with that, I want to kind of jump into a brief presentation. As I thought about what I wanted to present today, it was very aligned with what Stephanie was introducing, which is back to what do we do instead? And I recently published an article on our website. We publish a lot of articles there. And the article was called, If Not Seclusion and Restraint, Then What? A Better Way Forward for Students and Educators. And we write a lot on this topic. So this article wasn't entirely new from the perspective of this is something we talk about. But this article really tried to take into account an educator's perspective. This is a question I hear a lot when we begin to publish things kind of critical of restraint and seclusion. We hear a lot of feedback. Some of that feedback is sometimes pushback to say, well, what else do you expect us to do as people kind of raise their hands in the air? And for today, really, I want to present a version of this, which is, if not seclusion and restraint and timeout, then what? And talk about the what. So having written that article again, it was really informed by a lot of the input that we hear from time to time when we talk about these issues. And, I hear things like, well, you don't understand the kids that we support, or, what do you expect us to do if a child kicks us? And many educators kind of arrive at this idea of, we don't know what else we can do. We've tried everything, so there must not be a solution. And that comes from, a place of exhaustion, of moral injury, of fear. If you don't know what else to do to kind of keep your classroom environment safe, it's a really scary place to be. So this article and this presentation is really an invitation to think about what are the things that we can do differently? How can we better support our students, but also our teachers and staff, because that's critical. It takes a teacher who feels safe and secure and supported to be able to support a student in the same way. So I want to think a little bit about the path that got us here. I think that people become educators very often because they want to help. People become special educators often because of a personal reason. I can't tell you how many educators I've met that had someone in their life with a disability, and they dedicate it to trying to help others. And this is a profession where people really kind of go down this path because they want to make a positive difference. Nobody becomes an educator and imagines they're going to find themselves in a situation where they're physically holding a child down or putting them in a room and holding the door shut. However, a lot of the systems that teachers work in, promote these as solutions. And very often, you hear this dialogue that, well, we don't like doing these things, but they're necessary for safety, or we don't like doing them, but we don't have anything else we can do. And today's event is all about what else we can do. We find that these things often happen, and I know Stephanie and Tim could talk about data here, but if you look across a state like Massachusetts, you may find areas where they happen a lot more than others. What's different between those areas is not typically the children. What's different is often the training, the culture, kind of the frameworks for meeting student needs. So, we've gotten to this point because often the teachers and staff don't have the tools and training and support that they need to really invest in other options. And sometimes it begins to feel like these are the only things standing between, myself as a teacher and what could be chaos. So we've gotten to this point where these things are often used excessively because sometimes that's the only tool that's being offered. Now, if we reflect on what we know today, and we continue to learn more and more every day, we know a lot about trauma. We know a lot about the brain and behavior, things that we didn't know 30 or 50 years ago. We have been on this journey learning more about how the brain is impacted by trauma, how that can lead to stress-related behavior. We've learned more about disability, but some of this information is not really making its way to educators in classrooms. We also know through a lot of work that's been done out there from the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Justice, and listening to families and testimony, and even research that restraint, seclusion, timeout can be deeply harmful. A little over a year ago, Secretary Cardona, as he was moving out from his role, published a letter about restraint and seclusion and the impact that it has. We've actually been working with the University of Texas in Austin, looking at how these things can lead to trauma down the road as well. So we know a lot about the harms that can be caused by exclusionary and punitive discipline, by restraint, seclusion, and timeout. And we know a lot more about behavior than we'd known before. But we're still in this position where, without knowing what else to do, it's really difficult to move forward. So I want to talk a little bit about the impact of these practices of restraint, seclusion, and timeout on children, and we'll also talk about the impact on educators as well. It's really important to understand that these things, being held down in some way, or being forced into a room against your will, or being even kind of coerced into a room and then not let out. These things can really be traumatic for children, and they can lead to a situation where a child might not feel safe. And when a child doesn't feel safe, they can't access the thinking, logical, rational part of their brain. They can't actually learn. We've got to have children regulated before we can actually educate children. So very often we find that, again, these things being done will actually increase behavior, lead to new challenges. And very often it leads a child to internalizing that when they're having a hard time, people are going to use control and force rather than understanding and support. So we often see in the long term that the kids that are subjected to restraint, seclusion, timeout, they tend to have an increase in anxiety. We see more school refusal, sleep problems, signs of post-traumatic stress. And again, these behaviors that we're seeing are often tied below the surface to unmet needs. When I see a child being restrained, secluded, subjected to timeout, very often below the surface, what I really see is a child whose needs we have not yet appropriately met. If we had appropriately met their needs, we might not be in the position that they had that big behavior that led to something like this. And there's a lot of reasons these things happen. Sometimes they happen for non-compliance. Sometimes it's a matter of sensory overload, communication differences, unmet needs. There's so many reasons these things can happen. But in the end, they actually lead to an increase, not a decrease in behaviors, and an increase in not feeling safe. These things also have a tremendous impact on educators. And I want to begin by saying, if you're on this call today or listening later, you may have been scratched or bitten or threatened, and the impact of that, the impact of the trauma caused by that is very real. It can lead you to become hypervigilant and not feel safe in your classroom. And just like a student needs felt safety, so does an educator. And educators that have been through these things often begin to kind of brace for the worst. They begin to anticipate behaviors and sometimes begin to use these interventions kind of more proactively because of the fear and anxiety that's been caused. And it's not just about, the trauma of what's being done to you, but also what you're being asked to do. I've talked to many educators that have had experiences with this. And when you're being asked to physically restrain or seclude or, force a child into a timeout space, it can have a significant impact on you as an educator as well. It can lead to guilt. It can lead to dread about going to work and feeling numb as a way to cope. So there's got to be a better way. We also know that moving in the direction of restraint or seclusion or even timeout, where it's kind of forced in some way, increases the chance of injuries. When we go hands-on in any way with a child, very often at that point they will go into a fight or flight state, and very often we see an increase in injuries when these things begin to happen as well. One of the things I talk about a lot in presentations I give is what I've come to kind of call the discipline trauma cycle. And the idea behind this is that if we look at the children who are often on the other side of things like restraint, seclusion, timeout, suspension, and expulsion, very often the common factor is these are kids with trauma. Maybe kids that have experienced trauma in various other environments, maybe kids that have experienced trauma in schools. Maybe children with disabilities or neurodivergent children. because there's a tremendous intersection between trauma and disability, between trauma and neurodivergence. When you're an individual in a world that's not well designed to accommodate your needs, the world itself can begin to present trauma. And we know that trauma changes the brain. We know that those changes in the brain can lead to difficulties in learning. They can also lead to a more reactive stress response system. We know that people that experience a lot of trauma tend to become hypervigilant. And when someone is hypervigilant, they are far more likely to have what I would call stress related behavior. I'm not calling this bad behavior, challenging behavior, or any of that. What I'm saying is that someone that does not feel safe, someone that is hypervigilant, is often likely to have kind of what I would call kind of bottom up or body up behavior. This is behavior that's coming from a place of a lack of safety, a lack of feeling supported. And that distress behavior very often in a classroom leads to compliance demands. A child's having a difficult time. The first thing we do is we demand compliance. And in a dysregulated nervous system, as we put demands of compliance on a child, it can actually be perceived in the nervous system as a threat. That threat can push the child further into a sense of escalation, and that can go and result in a fight, flight, or freeze response. That's where we see that big behavior, the knocking something over, running out of the room, throwing something, spitting, kicking. And that behavior in and of itself often results in a restraint or a seclusion or a timeout or some other punitive exclusionary practice. And the interesting thing is that exclusionary punitive discipline or restraint, seclusion, whatever it may be, can actually lead to an increase in trauma. So every time we go through this cycle, we're increasing the trauma load, we're increasing the hypervigilance, we're increasing the likelihood of behavior. This same cycle can actually be applied to adults and educators as well. If an educator finds themselves in a situation where they're doing something like a physical hold or taking a child to a timeout room, these things can lead to trauma for the educator, which can lead them to not feel safe, and that can lead to more likelihood to go down a punitive and exclusionary pathway in the future. So what we find is these things often feed each other rather than helping to diminish the causes that are really at the center of this. So I believe really firmly in this idea of going upstream. Yes, there are better things you can do in the moment, and you'll see some of those things today. But in my mind, a lot of this is how do we move upstream? How do we get to a situation where we can avoid the dysregulation that led to the big behavior in the first place? So, again, we often hear this question, if not this, then what? And that is making an assumption that you only have two options, either, kind of restraining or overpowering a child or confining them or doing nothing. And that's clearly not the case. There are other things that we can do before and during escalation. There are things that we can do that are aligned with what we know about the brain, what we know about trauma. There are things that we can do upstream to prevent getting to these places in the first place. So rather than just kind of thinking about how do we make a child comply, we need to really be curious and try to understand, what is this behavior telling us? What does a student need to feel safer? We often say behavior is communication. I nod my head in agreement. Absolutely, behavior is communication. But even more fundamentally, our behavior is biology. And there's a lot of things that drive our behavior that often people are not really noticing. And we have a tendency to think that all behavior is intentional. In fact, much of the behavior that we see, much of the dysregulation we see is not. And if we take a pathway of trying to treat it like it's intentional, we won't come up with solutions that really help resolve these things. So again, shifting our approach, moving to something found kind of grounded in neuroscience, understanding the impact of trauma can really change the approach that we take. And this new lens, this new lens of even shifting the way we talk about behavior, rather than thinking about this as challenging behavior, bad behavior, understanding a stress response, understanding that behavior might be coming from the bottom up. Behavior might be coming not from willful defiance, but it may be coming from a child that does not feel safe, a child who's having difficulty with the environment. And if we begin to treat behavior as stress responses, rather than willful intentional behavior, it changes the things that we put in place to support the child. It also helps the adults to shift away from even taking the behavior personally, because when we understand This is a nervous system that is having a difficult time, not a child who's giving me a hard time. It really can help us shift things. So I'm a big believer in kind of shifting to understanding behavior as biology, communicating distress, and what we can do to intervene earlier to change the outcome. Now, in my mind, again, the answer is about moving into directions that are trauma informed, neuroscience aligned, neurodiversity affirming, relationship driven, and collaborative. And when we begin to do that, we really begin to move upstream and we can reduce the use of restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, timeout, and a lot of the other forms of punitive and exclusionary discipline. What's exciting to me about this is that you're going to be hearing from some people today talking more directly about some of the approaches you can use to do this. So we're going to have an opportunity to hear more. Now, again, as I share some of these things, and I work often with educators in schools, I often hear that still big kind of pushback, but you don't understand the kids that we support. You don't understand the kids that we're working with here. And I hear that and absolutely take it very seriously. Many of the, children that you support, many of the students that you work with, they can have some distressed behavior that can look really big and be dangerous. Some children are large and strong and might have really unpredictable behavior. And of course, many of you in this role may have been hurt in the past, and that can lead to, a lot of difficulty. So we're not saying at all that the fear is not valid. Absolutely, it is. But the tools that we can put in place to shift away from these responses can really be transformative. And at the end of the day, very often when we see these things happening in high numbers, it's the tools that we've been given that aren't working. And there are better programs that have been used and used in schools across the nation, used in schools that have worked with and supported children that have come in with significant challenges, where they have eliminated seclusion, reduced restraint, eliminated the use of timeout. So it absolutely is something that's possible and can be done in all of your schools as well. So with that, kind of want to just make the point here that we can move forward. We can do better. Kind of back to the words of Maya Angelou. How do we know better and do better? And of course, safety is not about the absence of chaos at any cost. Safety is critical. Felt safety is critical. But the substrate for safety is the relationships that we form. It's the environments that we create. It's the things that we do to help keep nervous systems regulated. You'll be hearing about the regulated classroom later today. What can we do to kind of create those safe and regulated environments? And of course, restraint and seclusion and timeout are not things that promote that feeling of safety. So you deserve better tools. You deserve better approaches. And I really believe that we can build systems that have an answer to that question of, if not restraint, seclusion, and timeout, then what, with approaches that will help us get there. So today, of course, you're going to be hearing from several approaches, and I've had the privilege of meeting some of the individuals that you might be hearing from today. I know some of this work fairly well. We often talk about alternatives on the at the Alliance. I tend to support all the alternatives that are out there. I don't look at one and say this is the only one, or this is the best one, or there are a lot of different approaches out there, and this is a really great sampling of approaches. We've got Think Kids and Lives in the Balance, and Ukeru, the regulated classroom. Lots of fantastic resources, and these are approaches that are very highly aligned with those approaches that I talked about, that are trauma-informed, neuroscience aligned, neurodiversity affirming, relationship driven, and collaborative. So you're in for, I think, a real treat to hear about some of these approaches if you're not already familiar with them. I do also want to make the point that the Alliance, of course, can help as well. We offer a range of services to districts. We work with schools and districts on things like evaluations, presentations, consultation, training and professional development as well. So we're always happy to help if you've got a need around reducing the use of timeout and seclusion. Would encourage you to reach out to us if you need any support. And I will leave you with my contact information as well. Final thing I want to mention here. This is my other favorite quote. And again, if you've seen me present before, these two quotes seem to appear in almost every presentation because they really guide this work. It's, as Maya Angelou says, it's about knowing better and doing better. But I love this from Reverend Desmond Tutu. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And in my mind, the understanding of trauma, the seeing behavior through the lens of the brain and the nervous system, that's work that's upstream. That's work that helps us understand why are we ending up in these situations where we have this really big dysregulated behavior and what can we do differently. So critical to all of this work is that we're going upstream, that we're doing things that are proactive, that are based on need, and avoiding the dysregulation and the behavior that can come. So with that, it looks like I've got about 45 seconds left. I'm going to leave you here with my contact information. I encourage you to reach out if you're interested in the work of the Alliance. If you're looking for a partner in collaboration, we're happy to work with you and partner with you as well. And we offer a lot of resources as well on our website. We've got a tremendous number of articles that kind of dive into these things. We've got a learning management platform. We do book studies. In fact, we do book studies for educators. I've got a great one coming up actually, I think next month with one of Dr. Lori Desautel's books. So some great opportunities to get engaged with the work that we're doing. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I see Stephanie has appeared. So that is my cue, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and share with you this morning, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Guy. That was incredibly thought-provoking and helpful information. Really appreciate your time. Now I would like to welcome Tim Sindelar, who is going to review the new regulations. Tim is a retired Massachusetts attorney with an impressive 48-year legal career in public interest advocacy, private practice, and teaching. Tim has spent years working to improve regulation of seclusion and restraint of Massachusetts students. And Tim has been a pivotal member of our team, and we're so glad he's joining us today. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm really glad to be here, and it is really amazing to see the interest and your response, those of you in the audience. We're really heartened by doing this. We know that, as Stephanie has said, as Guy has said, this is a difficult subject. This is a difficult time in the life of our country. And we're all kind of staggering under a lot of different responsibilities. We now have a new additional way of looking at things that goes into effect in 5 short months. So we hope by going over what exactly is required by these new regulations, and then, as Guy has said, offering the alternatives, offering the systems that you can put into place in your schools to hopefully not have to worry about compliance with these regulations, because you are not going to be engaging in the practice of seclusion, and you are not going to be engaging in the practice of restraint. So if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I wanted, before we dive into the regulations, to kind of just give you a brief history of regulation of seclusion in Massachusetts schools. Some of this has been referenced by Stephanie and Guy, but just I think it's interesting to look at the fact that 26 years ago, we did not have any type of regulation with regard to the use of restraint in our public schools or our approved special education schools. And so in 2000, the legislature passed a small bill that simply required the Board of Education to adopt some regulation regarding the use of restraint and seclusion. It took the board another year or so to review regulations, propose regulations. On April 2nd, 2001. Regulations went into effect for the first time in the state of Massachusetts, regulating how students could be excluded from classrooms and regulating the use of restraint. So we've now had 25 years of practice of limiting what is done to protect the rights of students, and And I think it goes without saying that, we all want to avoid the use of seclusion. We all want to avoid the use of restraint. Uh, we all recognize that this is, in fact, a very risky um, practice to employ. The state of California, in adopting new regulations just 5 years ago about restraint and seclusion, said that restraint and seclusion are dangerous interventions. This is language from the statute that's dangerous, and then went on to adopt a number of regulations similar to what Massachusetts is now putting into effect in August. Um, uh, Stephanie has gone over the history of recent history uh, on guidance in 2021, the grants that have been issued over the last couple of years to provide you, the schools, with the resources to bring in professionals, such as professionals that we are talking with this later in this presentation, and ultimately leading to the new regulations being adopted last year. And with those regulations going into effect on August 17th. So if we can go to the next slide. So the new regulations do a few things. The most crucial thing that the regulations do is put in, first of all, they change the way that Massachusetts had approached seclusion, timeout, removal from the classroom in the past. The regulations going back as far as 2001 have said that seclusion is illegal in Massachusetts. And that was great. How unfortunately, the regulations also said that timeout can be used, and then didn't really define timeout. As a result, many entities started using exclusionary timeout, where students were locked into rooms that they were not allowed to leave, and sometimes supervised and sometimes unsupervised, but all done under the rubric of timeout. That abuse of the timeout loophole in the regulations that existed in 2001 and then were amended in 2014 led to this campaign that resulted in the current regulations. Unfortunately, what in the way that the format that the state determined should be implemented, for the first time, we have legalized the use of seclusion. But as you'll say, it is permitted only in an emergency situation as a last resort and requires extensive preconditions. There are 12 preconditions we're going to go over. And you'll see as you go through those that for the most part, it's going to be virtually impossible to establish these preconditions for any kind of routine or casual use of seclusion. This is going to be the use of seclusion for hopefully an extremely small number of students in a very small set of circumstances. And most importantly, as you get to the last point on this seclusion has to stop within 3 years of the active date of these regulations. So in other words, in August of 2019. So we're creating a buffer period where schools can access professional help, can use resources such as the 6 entities that are presenting here later today to develop a culture, to develop practices, to increase the ability of staff to respond to emergency situations such that in 3 years, we should not have any seclusion going on at all. So seclusion is allowed in a very narrow set of circumstances. Timeout has been clarified so that there's no longer a loophole for the use of timeout. Timeout is clearly defined, and we'll go over that definition in a few minutes, to state that a lock setting cannot be used. And not only that, but the student must be allowed to leave a timeout setting. So timeout is essentially a voluntary action, a separation. We recognize that there are times when a student might be overwhelmed. A student may want a quieter setting. A student may want a break from what's going on in the classroom. And when it's voluntary, that's a fine practice. I think that it needs to be carefully considered. And we'll look at, there are some regulations regarding how it can be implemented, but it is as a voluntary matter, an appropriate behavioral response. So in addition to the regulation of the spaces, the preconditions on the use of seclusion that we mentioned, the regulations have new reporting requirements for reporting incidents of the use of seclusion to DESE. They also include an extensive internal review, similar to what's been required for a number of years now, since 2014, with regard to the use of restraint. And again, the regulations contained an end date for the use of seclusion by school districts and approved special education schools and collaboratives in Massachusetts. If we could go to the next slide. So the major operative sections of the regulations are in the definition. So we look at first the definition of seclusion: involuntary confinement of a student in a room or an area with or without adult supervision from which the student is not permitted to leave. So it doesn't make a difference whether there's whether it's an adult in the room or area in which an individual is confined. If that student cannot leave that room, then it is seclusion. Now, the regs do recognize there are certain things that are not included under this term. So generally, the notion that students aren't secluded in a classroom if they need permission to leave the room or area. So that's just kind of common sense. Obviously, that's not seclusion, even though one could say they're not permitted to leave, but they are permitted to leave with permission. Seclusion is not timeout, and we keep going back and forth between those terms. Timeout being a behavior support technique that we'll talk about in the next slide in terms of the definition. But again, the difference with timeout is that the student is allowed to leave the area if they want to. And seclusion is also not putting a student in a separate location within a classroom or with an instructor, as long as instruction continues. So it is not putting a student in a corner and having them look at the wall, but it is can be isolating a student to a certain extent within a general classroom, as long as instruction continues for that student. So if we can go to the next slide and look at timeout. So the definition of timeout, as you can tell from the introduction to this, is that it's a behavioral support strategy. And I think that's important to recognize, first of all, that there has to be some science, some policy, some consideration with regard to the use of timeout to make it qualify as a behavioral support strategy. But the definition goes on to say it's a situation where a student temporarily leaves a learning activity or a classroom by choice or direction. Now, but remember, the definition stresses the voluntary nature of this. It's done for the purpose of calming. During timeout, a student must be continuously observed by staff, and they can only be in an unlocked setting which the student is permitted to leave. If the student, during the administration of a timeout session, says, okay, I'm done, I want to go, they have to be allowed to go, period. As soon as there is an expression of desire from the student to leave the area, if they are contained in that area longer than the expression of that interest, it becomes seclusion, and it becomes prohibited unless the dozen preconditions for the use of seclusion are met. And again, the important thing about timeout in the new regulations that is somewhat different from prior. Prior regulations were a little unclear as to the need for staff support in the administration of a timeout session. These regulations make it very clear that staff need to be with the student or immediately available to the student at all times during the timeout session. And finally, the regulations are specific in saying that timeout shall cease as soon as the student is called. So there's a prohibition on continuing to keep a student confined beyond a period of time in which they have calmed down and indicated a desire to return to the classroom. So if we go to the next slide. The new regulations expand the safeguards for the administration of timeout, and then we'll look at the safeguards with regard to seclusion. The regulations tell us, and these begins with a statement that were in the current regulations, that any room or area used for timeout must be clean, safe, and sanitary. And the regulations go on, though, to add some detail about the nature of the space being used for timeout. And again, remember, this is a voluntary process that must stop when the student wants to leave the area. But the rooms can't, they have to be appropriate for calming the student. They have to be an appropriate size for the age and needs of the students. They have to be appropriately lit, ventilated, heated, cooled, and consistent with the remainder of the building. It has to be free of objects or fixtures that might be dangerous to the student. It has to be, and this is really important, in compliance with applicable local fire and building code requirements. And I've seen situations where local fire departments have found that a locked room violates the fire safety code, local fire safety code, and will refuse to authorize the same. And it finally needs to be in compliance with any other standards that might be developed by an appropriate regulatory body. We can go to the next slide. And let's talk about seclusion. As I said in the overview, it's limited to use in an emergency situation as a last resort on an individual student basis. And then finally, the condition is the student's behavior needs to pose an imminent threat of assault or imminent serious physical harm to self or others. And these are important characteristics. I should have mentioned, I guess, earlier that in connection with these regulations, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has issued a guidance about implementation of the regulations. And in that guidance, the department makes it clear that what they are looking at in terms of the kind of behavior that could justify the use of seclusion is the same kind of behavior that's defined in IDEA as a serious physical threat, which is quite alarming if you look at it. It talks about permanent injury, loss of a life or limb. It is not a simple kick in the shins. It is not anything short of very, very serious possible physical harm. So to begin with, there should be a very narrow set of circumstances where a student is actually subject to seclusion. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, and I apologize for the size of the text on the screen, but there are 12 preconditions. And note, I say preconditions, which means only if these conditions are met in advance can seclusion be used. So, a school can't determine that, this conduct that the student's engaging is physically assaultive or poses an imminent risk of physical harm, we're going to seclude the student. They can't unless these conditions have been met. What are the conditions? First condition is there's been a history. This isn't the first time. So the first time that there's a reaction by the student is going to be insufficient to impose seclusion. Second condition, the student's not responding to directives or other lawful and less intrusive behavioral interventions, or those types of interventions are inappropriate under the circumstances. The next condition is other forms of intervention have failed to ensure the safety of the student and the safety of others. And we're hoping that by getting an introduction to the 6 providers that we brought here today, you will all have learned other forms of intervention that can ensure the safety of students and not use the imposition of seclusion. Another precondition is there's no medical contraindications as documented by a licensed physician. So I read this to be something that if a school is considering the use of seclusion with a particular student, that they will need to obtain a doctor's statement that there are no medical contraindications indicating that seclusion shouldn't be used. The next condition is that there's psychological or behavioral justification for the use, and there's no psychological or behavioral contraindications as documented by a licensed mental health professional. So again, it would require in the advance of use of seclusion such an indication that there is no contraindications. The next condition is very important, that the program has obtained consent to use seclusion in an emergency situation from the parents. And the student where appropriate. Now, I'm not sure what that means. Certainly older students, we know that beginning at age 14, students have the authority to consent. Certainly, once a student reaches 18, they absolutely have the legal requirement to consent or not consent. But again, what's important here is before the use of seclusion, there must be a consent to the use of seclusion by the parent and where appropriate, the student. The next precondition is that the individual using it, the staff that is taking the student to the area where seclusion is being imposed, has to have received training about alternative behavioral interventions and management techniques. Again, something that we're hoping to be able to present to you today. If we can go to the next slide. So here's an additional 5 requirements. The program's documented compliance with the other conditions. So, perhaps this isn't really a separate condition or so, but note that it's not just that the school or the program has complied with A through G. They have also documentation to show that. So again, before the use of seclusion, I would suggest that schools need to have a checklist and look at regulations A and D through G and check off that they have met each one of those requirements. And it goes back to consent, it goes back to the contraindications. So the next preconditions are more, I guess, actually conditions of the imposing of seclusion. There has to be a staff member continuously and actively monitoring and observing the student and immediately available to the student. Does that mean that there has to be a staff member in the room? No. If we look at the next regulation, we'll see that you can probably use rooms in which there is a door with a window, but the student needs to be observable in all parts of the room. I know some schools are now using rooms in which they have video cameras. that seems to be permissible under these regulations, except that, again, it needs to be really clear that someone's immediately available to the student. So if there is a school using a video camera, there can't be someone in a control room, 50 feet away. There has to be someone immediately available to the student. During the administration, the staff member who is monitoring has to continue to use de-escalation and calming strategies unless it's unsafe or counterproductive for purposes of calming. The regulation makes it clear that you can't use seclusion as a means of discipline or punishment. It can't be a standard response to an action that doesn't constitute an imminent threat. You can't write it into an IEP that will use seclusion in these circumstances unless those circumstances are imminent threat of assault or imminent serious physical harm to others. Next slide. So again, the regulations repeat over and over again. It's to be used only in emergency situation of last resort. It's to cease as quickly as the student's behavior no longer poses a threat of assault or serious harm, and it has to stop if the student is observed to be in severe distress. The regulations also provide, obviously, that any room that is used for the purpose of seclusion has to meet those same conditions that we just talked about with regard to timeout rooms. Next slide, please. So there are requirements with regard to notice and reporting. Any seclusion that goes more than 30 minutes has to be approved by the principal. And there is no provision in here for delegation, no approval for the principal to delegate responsibility for in terms of this 30-minute time period. And then the regulation requires that the school must make reasonable efforts to notify a parent within the same timelines as contained in other sections of the regulation. This is the sections contained with regard to the use of restraint. So schools should be familiar, but essentially what these regulations say, that parents need to be notified of the use of seclusion within 24 hours, and there has to be a written report done within 3 days. Within the school, there needs to be a written report prepared within the same school, no later than the next school working day. And that needs to be provided to the principal. The principal has a great responsibility here in terms of reviewing these reports. And as we'll see in the next slide, we can go to that slide. The principal has to conduct a regular review on a weekly basis of the data in the school, identifying students where emergency intervention seclusion has been used during the week. The principal has to conduct a monthly review of school-wide data, and this information needs to be reported to the department in a manner and form specified by the department. So if you look at the guidance, and we are providing you with the regulations in addition to the slides today and the recording from the day, and we're also providing you with the guidance. The guidance has suggested a form for, at least at this point, for using. I'm sure that DESE will be developing a more extensive form than what's in the guidance for subsequent use. But let's go to, again, the major issue, the hopeful condition that we have in the regulations, and that is in 46073F. And that is that schools have to examine and adopt alternatives and strategies for reducing and eliminating the use of seclusion no later than 3 years from the date of effectiveness. The date of effectiveness, again, the reminder, is August 17th of this year. So no later than 3 years from August 17th of 2019, schools should have adopted policies to eliminate the use of seclusion. And again, hopefully today, our other presenters are going to provide you with ideas, thoughts, and training that will do that. Next slide, please. The department's going to collect this data. They'll be reporting. Reporting may be similar to the current reporting with regard to discipline. Next slide, please. No IEP can be written to include the use of seclusion as any standard response. And next slide, please. So I've pointed out the guidance, which you should have to look at. Here's also the link. It also suggests that you become familiar with the United States Department of Justice efforts on seclusion. The Department of Justice has investigated numerous school districts across the United States over the last 10 years and has ended up in extensive settlement agreements with, I think 17 or 18 school districts. The Department of Justice sees the inappropriate use of seclusion as a violation of a student's civil rights, something to keep in mind because it can expose the school to substantial penalties, including damages to the student. So that's my overview. I hope that that's been helpful to you, and thank you again for being here. We will be able to respond to questions in writing after this event. Unfortunately, given the size of our attendance here, we can't do it any other way. So again, thank you for this opportunity. And I hope you all look forward to this exciting opportunity to be more protective of the rights, the civil rights, and the physical rights of the students you work with.
Thank you, Tim. That was incredibly helpful. The new regulations are substantially different than the way that schools have operated. And so it was great to have that overview and appreciate your time. We're going to now move to Emily Lamarca. And Emily lives in central Massachusetts with her family and is the proud mother of 2 children, including her oldest, who was born with Down syndrome. She began her advocacy work in 2006 with the Massachusetts Down Syndrome Congress and has since contributed in a variety of roles, including the First Call program, Advocates in Motion, Boston Marathon and Falmouth Road Race team, and the organization's Government Affairs Committee. Emily also serves as a parent advocate for the Commonwealth's Restraint and Seclusion Prevention Initiative and volunteers with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. Emily is deeply committed to improving how children are supported, particularly in school settings. For the past 7 years, she's worked as part of a team helping schools implement alternatives to restraint, seclusion, and timeout rooms. She envisions a future in which all schools across Massachusetts have access to high-quality professional development grounded in current neuroscience, safe and supportive relationships, and approaches that are proactive, trauma-informed, and respectful of each person's neurodiversity. Emily has been a critical member of our team, and welcome to Emily.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning. Before I begin, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the sponsors of this conference and to all of you for being here today to review the new DESE regulations on timeout rooms and seclusion and to learn about the frameworks that are helping schools successfully move beyond them. I'm here today because of my son, Cole, to share his lived experiences with seclusion, timeout rooms, and restraint. But I'm also here to offer a parent's perspective on how deeply harmful those practices were, not only for Cole, but for our whole entire family. It doesn't matter how many times I share Cole's story, I still struggle. It never gets easier to go into detail about something that harmed your child and to do it in such a public way. But I think it's important to share our family's journey because without understanding how these practices unfold in real life, I don't know that we can fully grasp how harmful they are or how urgent it is to eliminate them. But I also want to share a few important lessons I've learned from these experiences, as vital as it is to acknowledge the reality of how traumatic seclusion and restraint can be. It's just as important to take a moment to consider how we can move away from these practices, because doing so is absolutely possible. But let's start with Cole. Next slide, please. This is why I'm here today. Cole is our family's North Star. He has a way of slowing us down in the best possible way. He reminds us to appreciate the moments that seem small, but actually matter the most. He feels everything deeply and fully, and he has taught us to do the same without trepidation. He is kind, funny, thoughtful, and yes, he challenges us. He loves music with a playlist that is all over the map. He's incredible. And like every child, he deserves a chance to show how much he has to offer this world. Next slide. Cole came into our world 6 weeks early via emergency C-section. My heart is heavy to tell you that we think your son has Down syndrome, were the words the doctor said to me even before I was able to hold Cole. Nothing could have prepared me for that moment. But as soon as I held him, everything else faded. He was Cole, he was beautiful, and I was instantly in love. In the days that followed, I learned more about Down syndrome. And I remember having this underlying feeling of fear. What would it mean for Cole? Would he be accepted by his peers? Would he be treated unkindly? In all those what if scenarios, I never once imagined that he would be harmed in the way that he was in a place where he should have been safe. I share that not with judgment, because I do not believe the intention was ever to harm Cole, but the outcome is that he was harmed. And here, outcome must matter more than intention, because there are thousands of children and families significantly traumatized by restraint and seclusion across Massachusetts. Next slide, please. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network defines a traumatic event as a frightening, dangerous, or violent event that poses a threat to a child's life or bodily integrity. For Cole, those experiences included timeout rooms, seclusion, and restraint, all by the age of 10. Those moments for Cole were traumatic, teachers clearing the classroom, closing the door, and blocking him until they could restrain him. It was the time that he spent in the comm room, the way he was taken there, and even what he witnessed happening to his friends. Later, he would ask about the sounds that they made as they were taken away to what he called the naughty room. Next slide, please. Because seclusion is often preceded by physical restraint or forced escort, with children moving against their will and their autonomy violated, their nervous systems register danger and shift into survival mode. They respond instinctively, screaming, struggling, and resisting. In Cole's case, he even tried to bite the arms of the staff that were carrying him. This highly escalated moment often ends in a timeout room, sometimes with the door closed or adults blocking the exit. The child is then immobilized with no way to escape. While it may appear that calm and control have been restored, the child is still in a state of distress. Trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk, and author of The Body Keeps the Score, has written extensively about the role of immobilization in trauma. He explains that when we face a life-threatening situation, our bodies are wired to fight or flee. But when escape is impossible, the brain adapts for survival by shutting down. New neural pathways are formed, and instead of taking action, the body goes still. This shutdown, I fear, is often misunderstood. It can look like calm, and in many cases, that appearance of calm is used as a signal to end the timeout. What we are seeing is not regulation. It is actually a nervous system that has been overwhelmed into collapse. When this happens, van der Kolk explains, the instinct of purpose is destroyed because you're trapped. Immobilization is very central to the concept of trauma. On more than one occasion, Cole was taken to a space that was essentially a storage room off a classroom with nothing inside but a metal filing cabinet. He was also brought to a designated timeout room, but when it was in use, this storage space was used as overflow. He would be brought there for behaviors labeled as noncompliance, such as not coming in from recess, throwing objects, or escalating, a blanket term the school used when he was in a fight or flight state. In that room, staff practiced planned ignoring with the door shut. When we learned this, I asked to see the space. It required a key to enter, and I still remember how anxious I felt standing inside, even knowing that I could leave at any moment. I couldn't imagine how it felt for Cole. It didn't take us long to find out. Over a 9-day period, Cole was restrained or physically escorted to a timeout room 13 times. We immediately requested that he no longer be placed in timeout, but our concerns were ignored, even as we began to see the clear signs of trauma. He regressed to wetting the bed at night. He had frequent nightmares and could no longer fall asleep unless one of us laid down with him. We were fortunate in a sense that Cole was able to communicate some of what was happening. He told us about angry eyes at school, and he could tell us that he was scared. He would tell us that it hurt, and if we asked more, he would say, I can't tell you. And he would hit his head with his hand while repeating, I'm a bad boy. As we tried to understand what was happening, the school became increasingly closed off. Meanwhile, Cole's fear grew more visible. When I would pull into the school parking lot, he would climb into the back of the car and try to hide. He told us that his teachers were evil and that they fought. At the time, I assumed he meant that they were arguing with each other. But years later, he made it clear that what he meant was that his teachers were fighting with his classmates. That is how he experienced watching other children being restrained and escorted into timeout rooms. Cole himself was restrained for periods of up to 10 minutes at a time. In one instance, he was wearing a weighted vest, something that we had not been informed about despite his documented cardiac condition. We would also learn that he had been placed in the timeout room on numerous occasions without our knowledge, sometimes for periods of up to an hour or more. The final incident before we removed Cole from school lasted over an hour and a half long. Ultimately, he was restrained and physically taken to a timeout room where he was locked inside for an hour. Eventually, he disrobed and lost control of his bladder. I've since spoken with many families whose children have had similar responses. These behaviors are well documented in situations of extreme stress and trauma. They are clear warning signs that a child is overwhelmed and that the intervention itself is inappropriate. We removed Cole from the school at the recommendation of his neuropsychologist because, in his words, the ill-advised behavior management strategies being used were causing Cole severe anxiety. We began searching for a new school, but many would not accept Cole. His records now described him as violent and aggressive with behaviors that matched behaviors that we had never seen before the use of restraint and seclusion. The schools that did meet with us often relied on the same practices. There was one in particular that had a timeout room in the basement, and it was an old building. The walls were padded blue, and there was a heavy door with a barred viewing window. It felt like something out of a horror movie. And this is where we would bring children when they were at their most vulnerable states. Ultimately, we made the decision to uproot our family and move to a new town. I truly believed that would mean Cole would be okay, that we could leave everything behind. What I didn't fully understand yet was just how powerful trauma is. But through conversations with other families and experts, and through our experiences with Cole, I came to understand that trauma simply doesn't go away. It becomes part of you. It changes the brain. It affects your development, and it shapes how the world is experienced. Trauma teaches the brain to expect danger. It lives in the body and often reemerges as reactions, not memories. And it doesn't follow a timeline. The brain can respond to present moments as if the past is still happening. In the time leading up to Cole's new placement, he began to share more about what happened on his own terms and in his own time. One morning at breakfast, he told his 7-year-old sister that his teachers used to lock him in a room and that he tried to get out, but he couldn't. Another time he said to me, Mom, I might like a new school. I might, but one where they don't hurt me. The nightmares persisted, and Cole carried his fear with him into every part of his life. When we were out in the community, he would ask over and over what would happen if we saw his old teachers. He worried they would come to our new home and hurt him. Even now, I still have to reassure him that they cannot come to our house. Next slide, please. In therapy, the depth of that fear became even clearer. His psychologist observed Cole's therapeutic play centering on a large dog crate in the playroom. He would spend many sessions climbing into the therapy dog's crate and locking himself inside, repeatedly saying, I'm a bad boy. He would also lock the stuffed animals in the crate too because they were also bad. Cole was formally diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder because of the harsh treatment he endured, the misuse of restraint and seclusion in his school. When Cole finally started at a new school, I began to understand just how lasting trauma is. He was constantly anxious, hyper alert, and could only tolerate being at school for short periods, often no more than 2 hours at a time. His teachers noted his persistent worry and deep distrust of adults, especially the principal, because Cole would tell them that his old principal would attack him. And as we know, trauma returns as a reaction, not a memory. So Cole was being triggered again and again, often without warning. It took months before I could pull into the school driveway without Cole panicking and hitting his head against the back of the seat and pleading, turn, turn, turn. I remember backing into my own driveway at home so that if the school called, I wouldn't lose even a few seconds to get to him. Our whole world revolved around this. For anyone who experiences trauma, processing it takes time, and for Cole, it unfolded slowly in pieces. At home, he would spend hours talking to himself. He would tell us that his brain was saying he was back at his old school and that he needed to fight. Even something like a book fair at his new school became a trigger. He remembered there had been one at his old school, and suddenly he was afraid his former teachers would come back and hurt him. Next slide, please. School was still a scary place for Cole, and supporting him required tremendous patience and compassion from his new team. They were open to following a support plan developed by his psychologist, one that emphasized the importance of relationship, trust, and felt safety. It took time, of course, but Cole was creating relationships and making progress. But just as we were beginning to feel hopeful, something happened that set Cole back. He refused to go to a new classroom where he didn't yet know the teacher. He did exactly what we hope children would do. He communicated his fear, telling his teachers he was afraid his former teachers might be there. But the principal saw it different. He believed that if Cole was allowed to avoid the situation, they would teach him to manipulate outcomes. He took a hard line and demanded compliance. That response pushed Cole straight back into a fight or flight state, restarting a cycle of fear, stress, and trauma. That particular day, Cole was isolated in the classroom without his peers for 3 hours. During that time, it was documented that the principal sat and stared at him in silence for nearly 15 minutes. There was no attempt to connect, no effort to help him feel safe. He was told he couldn't leave until he cleaned the room, and even then, he would still have to go to the unfamiliar classroom that he feared. In another incident, while Cole was being secluded, the principal, now taking an active role during these moments, grabbed his arm and forced him to go to a specific area of the room. That moment was devastating, and I couldn't believe we were back here again. Once again, the signs were unmistakable. Bedwetting, nightmares, fear of school, and repeatedly reenacting the moment the principal grabbed him. When I finally received the written report, I could identify exactly which day it described. It was the day I picked Cole up and found him sitting outside on a bench with his paraprofessional, completely dazed. He was staring straight ahead, and when I spoke to him, he didn't respond. He was looking right through me. He was disassociating. Our trust was not broken, it was shattered, and we felt the only choice we had to protect Cole was to remove him from the school setting and begin homeschooling him. Next slide, please. We have been homeschooling Cole since 2019, and he has thrived. At home, he has a deep and consistent sense of safety. There's no hierarchy of power. We work together. Our relationship is grounded in trust and respect. I try to meet him with patience, especially on the days that he simply doesn't have the capacity. We all have those days, and I don't believe in forcing him through them. I see him as an equal, and in that environment, he has flourished. Cole loves baking, and he's even helped create and publish an illustrated cookbook, something that he is incredibly proud of. And it feels like we have him back. For a long time, I wasn't sure that would ever happen. But the trauma is still woven into his life. He still has nightmares, although not as often. He still talks about the bad things that happened at his old school. And although less frequent, he is still triggered, particularly in situations where he feels his autonomy is being violated. I gave an example the last time I shared Cole's story about him getting his blood drawn and how the phlebotomist was moving quickly. Cole stopped her and said, "I know you don't know this. When you do this, it reminds me of my old school when my teachers would hurt me." In that moment, I felt both immense pride and deep heartbreak. Pride that he was able to advocate for himself, and heartbreak that everyday experiences could still bring him back to that place. Watching your child be harmed in this way changes you. It takes something from you that you can never fully get back. And I felt compelled to make sense of it, to understand how this could happen. And through that journey, I learned something that was both eye-opening and deeply unsettling. And that was that Cole's story is not unique. I've spoken with many Massachusetts families who know the ripple effects of this kind of trauma all too well. If they heard Cole's story, they would recognize it. The details might differ. The pain, the fear, and the lasting impact would feel painfully familiar in ways that no parent should ever have to understand. These parents can attest to the fact that timeout does not end when a child leaves a timeout room. These experiences become embedded in their nervous system, and they have learned, as we did, that there's this unrealistic expectation for a child to return to school after being secluded or restrained the very next day as if nothing had happened. They're expected to be ready to learn and to behave when less than 24 hours earlier, they felt like they were fighting for their lives. I imagine that most people would struggle in this situation. I know that I would. I learned that we deeply underestimate the impact of seclusion and restraint on a child, not necessarily out of negligence, but because we tell ourselves that children are resilient, that they can bounce back. And while resilience is real, it does not make children immune to harm. Experiences that are invasive, frightening, and overwhelming leave a mark. It is not a mark that fades quickly. I've learned that teachers, paraprofessionals, and administrators are under immense stress, often facing behaviors that feel overwhelming or even frightening without the right tools to respond. As a result, they rely on what they are trained in. De-escalation practices that are too late and they don't decrease the behavior, they end up fueling it. It's not working. And as one educator put it, we just don't know what else to do. This matters, and it points to a deeper truth that these children are not broken. We don't need to change them. We need to change the systems and behavioral models we rely on because they are failing. I believe that everyone is doing the best they can, but we can and we must do better. Many of the behavior models still used in schools were developed before we understood the neuroscience of behavior and the importance of identifying the state of the nervous system. These models were created before we recognized how essential safety, connection, and trust are for a child to regulate and learn. Without both emotional and physical safety, nothing else can come first. I've learned that children, particularly neurodivergent children, experience the world through the people supporting them, their tone, their body language, facial expressions, and energy. They depend on those adults to see them, hear them, and keep them safe. When that sense of safety is missing, their nervous systems respond to protect them. When we learn to recognize and respect that response, it changes everything. Fortunately, we have better options. Schools across Massachusetts are rethinking their approach to behavior and moving away from practices like restraint, seclusion, and timeout rooms. They are reducing and even eliminating them. Real change is possible. The frameworks you'll hear about today are part of that change. I encourage you to stay open to them, even when they challenge long-held beliefs, because that's where meaningful progress begins. These conversations about restraint, seclusion, and timeout rooms are not easy, but they are necessary. We must be willing to listen and learn from one another, educators, families, and professionals, because we share the same goal, schools where every student and every educator feels safe, heard, seen, and supported. And most importantly, we cannot lose sight of what is at stake. If we continue to rely on outdated practices, we risk causing real harm to the very children that we are meant to protect. It's our responsibility to acknowledge what isn't working and commit to doing better. We owe that to our students. We owe that to our educators. And I firmly believe we have the ability and the obligation to make that happen. Thank you for taking the time to hear from me today.
Thank you, Emily, so much. I know sharing such a personal story can be challenging, but I think the information is vitally important and really sets the frame for what we're moving into next. So thank you so much. We are going to take a 10-minute break and we will return for an exciting 6 different vendors who will share really useful, concrete tips on what the alternatives are. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back from the break. I am glad to move into the next section of the event, the webinar. So we are going to now welcome Ms. Hopkins from Lives in the Balance. Ms. Hopkins is an independently licensed clinical social worker who has specialized in working with children with challenging behavior for nearly 30 years. She has managed the clinical departments of 2 organizations serving youth and families across residential facilities, foster homes, therapeutic day schools, and homeless shelters. Since 2007, she has been a collaborative and proactive solutions trainer, helping schools, residential programs, hospitals, and families successfully implement the CPS model. Through this work, Ms. Hopkins has supported many organizations in significantly reducing and in many cases eliminating their use of seclusion and restraint. She currently serves as the Director of Learning Resources and Support for Dr. Ross Greene's nonprofit Lives in the Balance. Welcome, Ms. Hopkins.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Dr. Greene and all of us at Lives in the Balance, thank you for having us this morning. We're happy to be part of this event. The Collaborative and Proactive Solutions model is a trauma-informed, evidence-based, and inclusive model for reducing reliance on punitive practices, such as restraint and isolation. I was not always trained this way. At the beginning of my career, I was trained the way maybe many of you were, in straight behavior management. I was working in an organization in Massachusetts at the time who had residential settings and 2 therapeutic day schools. We were restraining kids a lot, about 400 times a year. Kids were getting hurt, staff were getting hurt. My nose has been broken in a restraint. And, you know, we started thinking, this is not as therapeutic as we're being told it is. This isn't working. We're feeling like we're on a hamster wheel and constantly putting out fires. And it was just serendipity that a colleague of mine recommended that I go hear Dr. Ross Greene speak. And I've never looked back. It's really amazing what can happen when we view kids with accurate, compassionate, research-based lenses. And then we're better positioned to help them and their educators and their families. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here's the key. Here's the key to ending the use of punitive interventions. We want to make sure that staff don't find themselves in the heat of the moment in the first place. This is absolutely key. All of our interventions have been too late. That's been our training, to intervene too late. And I was just talking with a few educators in Massachusetts a couple of weeks ago and talking to them about this idea. And they were looking at me like I was crazy, that this isn't possible, right? And it takes some intentional work to make kids predictable to us, because it turns out that the heat of the moment for each student is predictable, that there are predictable times that will land kids in the heat of the moment doing their behavior, right? And I often say with groups I'm talking with, you know, how many of you drive into work saying, I hope I get to de-escalate and escalate a kid today. I hope I get to do that. And no hands go up, right? We don't want to find ourselves in the heat of the moment. Nothing good happens in the heat of the moment, you know, and we don't know how it's going to go once we land there. So the key is to make students predictable to us so that we don't end up in the heat of the moment. We can actually intervene early. We want to be early with our interventions. And this is what's going to get us out of that crisis response hamster wheel, right? It's hard, especially if we're very, very used to that. We're very, very used to, you know, walkie-talkies going off and I got to go put out this fire and put out this fire and put out this fire. That can be hard to kind of break that cycle. And it is totally doable with some intentional work. We view kids' behavior as a signal. It's communication. It's a distress response. And we like to talk about it as a distress response because that brings us back to maybe when we've interacted with infants before. Infants have a distress response. And when infants have a distress response, we caring adults, what are we doing? We are noticing, observing, trying to understand what this is about. Based on those careful observations and trying to understand what they mean, we're intervening to try to reduce the distress. And then we're watching carefully to see if that intervention has worked, has helped to reduce the distress. And so it's taking that thinking and applying it to older kids and not getting so hung up on what the actual distress response looks like, what the actual behavior looks like, which I know can be very scary and dangerous sometimes. Those were certainly the kids I worked with. when I was learning the model. So not so much getting caught up in, oh my gosh, they're throwing chairs. Oh my gosh, they're punching other kids. So they're running into traffic. You know, obviously we're going to keep kids safe. And we're really more interested in what it is they're signaling to us by that behavior, right? And trying to use careful observations and understand and talk to kids is going to help us understand how to make this whole thing predictable so that we can get ahead and be proactive with our interventions and not find ourselves in the heat of the moment where we don't want to be at all in the first place. Next slide, please. Here is my original training, and maybe yours too. These are 5 bubbles in a declining sequence, and the colors are important. The blue is early, and the red is all late. And the way that I was trained, once we knew, looking at the blue bubble, once we knew a kid was having difficulty meeting an expectation, right? Maybe Joey doesn't go to the carpet for the math mini lesson, and it's an expectation that you sit at the carpet for the math mini lesson. My training would be to go to red bubble number 1. I'm gonna push, cajole, encourage. Come on, Joey, we don't want you to miss out what we're doing over here. You know, the other kids miss you, we need you over here. And that typically didn't work. And so then we go into red bubble number 2. Joey communicates that he's having difficulty meeting the expectation. Now we have his concerning behavior. Now maybe he's throwing things or he's running out the door, whatever it is he does to signal to us that he's in distress, right? Now that moves me into red bubble number 3. I've got to de-escalate him and cross my fingers that it works. Because if it doesn't work, I move into red bubble number 4 and I do what I do when my de-escalation techniques don't work, whether it's restraining, secluding, calling the school resource officer, clearing the room, whatever it is I might do. I was taught that de-escalation was a crisis prevention strategy. And it really is not. It is way too late. If we're finding ourselves having to de-escalate kids, we're way too late with our interventions. The blue bubble is early. Once we know that a student is having difficulty meeting expectation, once it becomes predictable, hey, we've seen this before. It doesn't work for Joey to sit at the carpet for math mini lesson. Once we know that, we can proactively work with him collaboratively to solve that problem so that we don't have to go down the series of red bubbles, which don't work anyway. And we just find ourselves back there, right? Next slide, please. Here's the work in the blue bubble. We're going to help the caring adults around Joey identify the problems that are causing his concerning behavior or his distress signal. We might find out through our process that we have that, yep, he typically does not sit at the carpet for the math mini lesson. He also has difficulty keeping his hands to himself when he lines up for recess. He also has difficulty coming in from recess when the bell rings. He also finds it challenging to go to PE class. He also has difficulty when he and his friends are disagreeing about the rules for Foursquare at recess, right? There are a lot of times during Joey's day that we can predict he won't handle well. There's a lot of situations in Joey's day, a lot of expectations that we can predict he won't handle well. And so we're going to figure those out, because as soon as we can figure those out, and Joey might have a very long list, right? Some kids do. The kids that we're most concerned about are going to have a long list, and that's okay, because now we're going to help educators prioritize what to work on first, right? And so if Joey has a list of 40 unsolved problems or unmet expectations, we're not going to work on them all at once. That won't be productive for anyone. We're going to prioritize and work on maybe 2 or 3 of our big fish, the ones that maybe cause the most concerning behavior, the ones that lead to the biggest safety issues, or the ones that happen the most frequently. We're going to work on those with him first. And then for everything else, we're going to engage in expectation management. And we like to say, engage in expectation management so that you don't have to engage in behavior management. Manage expectations on the front end will prevent the whole series of red bubbles from playing out. And that's really important for Joey and everybody else in the school, right? So we're going to manage some of the expectations we're not working on so that they don't result in the red bubbles playing out. And then for the ones that we prioritize, we're going to work with Joey collaboratively. Even if Joey does not use mouth words to communicate, we can still collaborate with him. We have ways of doing that. We're also going to, I also want to say, even if Joey is a kid who you're thinking, oh, he won't talk to us, he's not going to engage with us, he's not going to do this. We have ways of working with those kids too. So we do take collaborating with kids very seriously, and we do sometimes have to be creative in how we're able to do that. We're also going to work with him proactively, as I've mentioned before. That's kind of the theme, right? Outside of the heat of the moment. The best time to work with Joey on difficulties sitting on the carpet for the math mini lesson is not when we're asking him to go to the carpet for the math mini lesson. It's a different time, when he's at baseline, when we as caring adults can spare, which I know is a little laughable in education these days, but when we can spare a couple of minutes, I'm not talking about 20 or 30 minutes, a couple of minutes of proactive time with Joey, collaborating on the difficulty, going to the carpet for the math mini lesson, we'll get that problem solved. And then we won't see a distress signal from Joey. We will reduce his behavior. We're now saving ourselves time because those red bubbles take a whole bunch of time, right? So we're saving ourselves time now. And Joey's functioning better. We have some breathing room. These are the practices that are key to being early and not late. These are the practices that are key to reducing behavior and reducing how often we're finding ourselves in the heat of the moment. Because again, nothing good happens in the heat of the moment. Next slide, please. There is a whole lot of research, decades of research behind the effectiveness of the collaborative and proactive solutions model. On the last slide, I have our websites, and you can go and look at all the research we have posted on there. But I did want to highlight a couple of studies using the model in schools specifically to reduce restraint and seclusion. RSU 75 is in Maine, a neighbor of yours, and RSU 75 focused on 3 elementary special ed classrooms where they were using restraint and seclusion quite a good amount, as you can see in the early years on this graph. These were very high need students with a range of diagnoses. In the 2019-2020 school year, they began to learn the collaborative and proactive solutions model. And you can see in that school year, right when they began to learn the model, a dramatic reduction in both the use of restraint and seclusion that has been maintained over time. Really exciting stuff. Next slide, please. Here's one more. We took the largest school system in Virginia from thousands of restraints and seclusions down to mere dozens. They also started to learn the model late in the 2020 school year. And you can see right away that sharp decline, seclusions in orange, restraints in blue, sharp decline in both as they learn the model, which has been sustained over time. Next slide, please. We are really excited to be partnering with DESE to create professional development modules and supporting documents for schools who are looking to use the collaborative and proactive solutions to reduce isolation and restraint. Those are set to be ready this spring. In the meantime, you can check out the resources on these 2 websites. One of the reasons Dr. Green founded the nonprofit Lives in the Balance was to give his model away for free. So it's a treasure trove of resources. There's videos describing the model. There's audio, podcasts, recordings from years and years and years with all different interesting topics. There are many downloadable, printable resources that you can use as well. And we're adding to it all the time. We have also resources for parents on there, and we're about to launch a new parent platform with lots more for families. So that's exciting as well. So, if you're waiting for the DESE modules to come out, you can hop on these websites, find lots of ways to learn the model. You don't have to wait. I also put my email on here. If you have any questions at all, if you're looking for a specific resource, I'm always happy to hear from you. It's one of my roles at Lives in the Balance to connect people with resources for learning the collaborative and proactive solutions model. We certainly understand that it could be, if you're like me, it's an 180-degree shift from how you were trained and how you're working. And it can take a little bit to make that shift. And once you do, you'll never look back. I can assure you of that. Thank you again so much for having me this morning. I appreciate it. And best of luck to everyone in this important endeavor.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of that helpful information. We're now going to move on to Kim Sanders from Grafton. Kim has been working at Grafton for over 37 years, starting as a direct support professional, moving into a regional executive director position, and currently as the Chief Operating Officer and the President of UCARA Systems. She spearheaded the effort at Grafton to reduce restraint and seclusion, a process that has received national and international recognition and awards. Kim is also one of the inventors of UCARA, the least resistance approach to crisis management. Thank you and welcome, Kim.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. We can go right to the next slide if everyone's ready. So just to give a very brief overview of Grafton, you can see on the slide here the different services we have. We have psychiatric residential treatment in Virginia and Minnesota, therapeutic day schools and group homes, as well as early intervention services across a 5-county city area here in Virginia. Next slide, please. So I think it's always fair to make sure when people are starting to hear about UCARU and want to learn a little bit more about UCARU and what we've done, it's why we did it. Here at Grafton, Grafton's been around since 1958. I joined Grafton in 1989. And when I joined Grafton, I think I walked into a wonderful place that had the very best intentions and love for children, but in the time back in the 90s was very controlling. And I hope what you hear from me today is great transparency in where we were. As you can see on the slide there, as the 90s rolled through, we found ourselves in the early 2000s, 2003 in particular, doing over 6,600 restraints in 1 year, serving about 220 individuals and over 1,500 seclusions. And I share that definitely with zero sense of pride, but more from a perspective of I want to make sure that I'm being transparent and that people see if a place in the position that Grafton was in can do some of this minimization to elimination, then anyone can. We also experienced a death in 2004, which was terrible for the family, of course, the child, but also the organization and myself. I was the executive director of the region where that happened. So often people ask if that's why we invented UCARU, and I can promise you it was a super cool CEO that pushed us to do something different. And after we had first started that, or a couple months into action planning, we had this death. I can also tell you it changed everything in our perspective and our commitment to do something different to make sure that that was never repeated here, and also to keep our staff safe from having to experience something like that. At the same time as our use of restraint and seclusion was going up, so was our employee injuries. And we always had this myth that we needed those tools to stay safe. And the reality was that we were way less safe, to the point where at one point we lost our private workers' comp insurance. So when all that's happening in your organization, you can imagine people are not happy with each other, silos start forming, teams start infighting, and you lose your creativity around treatment planning and sort of this will to figure things out. The best way for me to, in hindsight, of course, when you're in it, you don't see it, but the best way to describe it is this feeling of being helpless and hopeless, and that we are the victims of the child's and client's behavior. So in general, we felt stuck. Next slide, please. So this gentleman joined our organization around that same time as our new CEO. As you can see from this picture, that was his picture on our website for over the 12, 14 years that he was our CEO. His name is Jim Gaynor. Super cool, came in with a whole different approach to leadership, one that was much more about inspiring people and working together to just figure things out. He came in and he listened a while. We were in sort of dire straits. And then one of our meetings where we were talking about our need to minimize the use of restraint and seclusion, he joined, and he sort of just came in and stopped the meeting because we've been talking for years, literally 5 years that committee had been in place. And he came in and issued this mandate. To the three of us who were executive directors across the organization, I was one of the three. And he said, we have to do something. It's time to stop talking. And he basically said, I'm not sure what that looks like, but I'm tasking the three of you with this mandate to reduce the use of restraint and seclusion without increasing client or staff injuries. Next slide, please. So you can imagine for me, I was like, okay, if I knew how to do that, we would have done that 20 years ago. Well, I took the opportunity to talk to my team, my leadership team in our Winchester region, and said, this is what we have to do. And of course, people were feeling that hopelessness live. What we did is we rented a room in a coffee shop and we just started talking, because all of us had worked at Grafton in some form of direct care as teachers or therapists or direct residential staff like myself for the first 5 years. And we needed to get at the heart of why we were doing all of these restraints and seclusions. And what we came up with were two primary things: fear and frustration. Number one, fear, meaning if anyone on here has been hit, kicked, bit, it hurts. So there's this fear of pain that's about to come to you if that happens again. There's this fear that you don't want a coworker hurt. You don't want other children or clients hurt. You don't want a situation to sort of get so unmanageable that it's dangerous for people within your organization or in the community. Then we started talking about frustration, and we started talking, and what really got me was it wasn't frustration with kids or clients. It was frustrations about administrative things, not having enough staff, not seeing our supervisor, not feeling like our voice was heard in treatment team meetings. Those were the types of frustrations. But then the bigger frustration we started talking about was the frustrations that those of us as employees bring to our work every day, the frustrations of life. And that really sort of clicked on a light bulb for us of who's taking care of our staff. That everything that we had been doing and talking about was how to make this better and a better experience for the student, for the kid. And of course, that's our mission as a nonprofit. That's what we're here for. But we quickly realized that we as leaders and administrators and directors needed to start taking care of our staff, so then they would be in the best mindset to do amazing things for kids. And so that's where our wheels started turning on what we needed to do. Next slide, please. So what we really started talking about was how do we address the fear and how do we address that frustration? Number one, the fear. We don't want to use restraint or seclusion, so what could we do? And we came up with this idea of just holding up something while you're backing up, something soft when someone's coming at you to do those hits or kicks or bites. Things that, again, it may seem like a simple kick, but it's not. Because a simple kick is normally not one kick, it's about three or four. And as a human being, I can't take those kicks very long before it starts affecting the way I react. So the idea was if we could block in a very safe and defensive way, then would we have better control over our amygdala and our responses. So we needed to make sure we gave our staff a physical way that was not restraint or seclusion to keep themselves safe. We started with bean bags, couch cushions, throw pillows, and they worked for a while until the material didn't work because the bean bag is not made to be kicked over and over or bit. You can bite a big hole in them. So what our staff then did is we talked to them and they told us exactly what they felt they needed to keep themselves safe. We found a manufacturer and were able to give those to our employees. The other thing for frustration, we started with this idea of what if we just try to create kinder atmosphere, a kinder environment. Right? On one of Guy's slides, I saw it talked about human love. What if we could just be like that for each other? Not just the way we treat kids, but how we also treat each other. And so for us at Grafton, we came up with the term comfort versus control. And the whole idea is when someone's at their worst, we need to be at our best. And we need to make sure that if we know a walk helps or swinging or playing ball or just talking, sitting and talking with someone is what helps the most, then when a child is having their worst moment, we want to offer that. We want to give them that to help them get out of that moment. Now, what we quickly did is we started doing that and it started working. And we actually had a SAMHSA consultant after a couple years came in and sort of analyzed and really looked closely at everything we were doing. And she let us know, and again, you have to remember this was back in probably about 2005. She let us know that what we were actually doing across the organization was trauma-informed care. And so we were able to formalize that into a piece of our training back then. Next slide, please. So what we did here within Grafton, it was working. It started working. We wrote a couple peer-reviewed journal papers, and the phone started ringing. So for the first several years, we were just doing it within our organization, and then others started asking, like, "Can you tell us? Can you show us?" And we were like, when we think we're onto something, and we have an obligation to share it when we think we have an answer. So you can see on this slide, these are Grafton numbers. We've reduced the use of restraint. It's actually about 99.6%. We have several areas of our organization that have been completely restraint-free, actually for over 10 years. Over 10 years ago, we ended seclusion across the entire organization. You can see our staff injuries have really declined. And also so important, the number and the percentage of goal mastery went up. And if you ask folks that are here, if you were to ask a teacher, like, wow, how did your goal mastery go up so much? They would actually say they get to teach now, that they're not so involved and they don't have all those things that take up time. And then the paperwork after a restraint, we don't have that sort of waste of time anymore either. So next slide, please. So Ukeru is now being used in over 1,200 schools and organizations across North America. We're super excited. We are in every state in the country, and sometimes it's whole districts, sometimes it's one or two private schools or hospitals. Foster care systems are using Ukeru, and we're having great results. In particular, in school districts, we are seeing it used not just in special areas or classrooms, but sometimes across the entire district. You walk into a gymnasium in a high school and you might see some of our blue shields there where they have taken on the trauma-informed approach and the philosophy of comfort versus control for everyone. Next slide, please. So if anybody has any questions or would like to talk to us more, it would be our pleasure. So thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be with such a wonderful group of people today.
Thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate this valuable information. We will now move to Think Kids, which we're glad to welcome Heather Johnson. She's the Director of Trading Services for Think Kids. She contributes to the program's strategy and leadership, oversees the quality of our training services, and leads the training team. Before her current role, Heather supported organizations and schools in learning and implementing collaborative problem solving as a Think Kids trainer and consultant. Heather has been practicing collaborative problem solving professionally since 2009, becoming certified in 2013. Welcome to Heather.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everybody. One thing that we didn't slide into the bio there is that I did spend over a decade working in schools as a behavior specialist, and that's during that time is when I learned about collaborative problem solving and was transformed professionally without question, and in the process, implementing in schools is a passion of mine. So I'm very excited to be here today. Next slide, please. Collaborative problem solving is a research-based, evidence-based practice. It is a trauma-informed approach. There is a lot of information about the research behind it on our website. I won't spend a lot of time on that right now. Next slide, please. So in the collaborative problem solving approach, we really are a model of threes. We have a lot, we joke about that. One thing that's very unique about our approach is that it really is foundationally based on a core philosophy that everything else stems off of. And that core philosophy is very in line with what you've heard so far already today with regards to people are doing the best that they can with the skills that they have access to. And you heard early this morning about the impact that stress has on people's neurobiology and how their brain is working. And that is exactly what we're talking about. When we have someone who is stressed, they don't access their thinking skills the same way. And so we really have to honor the fact of what they're able to do in certain situations. And that's what the entire model is based on. Through empathy and compassion and curiosity, we can make a huge difference in how we perceive what's happening and then how we decide what to do and then how we behave ourselves, how we act, how we actually intervene. So we have three phases in the approach. We want people to be thinking about what are you seeing? How are you assessing what's going on? Then make a plan, and sometimes that's a quick plan. What is the action that you want to take? And then put that action into place. Within this model, we have three options for what that action could look like, and we call them plan A, B, and C. And then with regards to the plan B itself, which is a collaborative intervention, we have the three ingredients of that problem-solving process, which are empathize, share, and collaborate. We're going to focus today, in the few minutes that I have with you, on applying this approach in the moment, day to day. An educator can do this anytime that they are going through their day interacting with students. We do have a piece of our model, a very significant piece of our model that involves a more formalized assessment that could definitely is very helpful to be utilized in more tier 3 kind of interventions with regards to targeted individualized interventions, really can be used to guide behavior support planning and things like that. Today, we're going to be talking about how it can be very practically applied day to day with students. Next slide, please. And we're going to start with the mindset. So yes, thank you. So what do we mean when we say people do well if they can? That's our grounding philosophy. And you can just go ahead to the next slide. What we mean is that we have 5 areas, and you can put all 5 up. Sorry about the phasing here. 5 areas of skill that really significantly impact our ability to manage the demands that we face on a day-to-day basis. Our ability to communicate what we need, what's important to us, what's challenging for us, to be able to hear other people and take in information from other people. Attention and working memory, our ability to stay focused, pay attention, keep track of time, keep track of what is needed of us in like with regards to directions for expectations and things like that. With emotion and self-regulation, our ability to regulate ourselves to the energy level that's needed from the task at hand, to manage our emotional response to frustration or disappointment. Cognitive flexibility, can we see the situation can happen in different ways? Can we manage if something goes wrong and it didn't go the way we wanted it to? Shifting from one thing to another, that can be really hard. And then social thinking, just picking up on what are people thinking about me? What's happening in the social world? Do I understand how my behavior is impacting others? Those types of things. Next slide, please. So we call this the equation of behavior. What's different from the way most of us have been trained, historically speaking, is that we know that the formula that leads to a behavior that in our model we kind of call undesired. So we might see someone behaving in a way that we wish they could do it differently. And we ask ourselves, why? What's getting in the way? Well, what's getting in the way is they're facing a situation, which we call a problem to be solved, which is, in other words, any expectation or triggering situation or a demand being placed on them, that in that situation, when it's being, they're not able to access any number of those thinking skills that might be needed to handle that situation better. And so what happens is if they don't have access to the skills they need, the behavior that comes from it is the best they can do in that situation. And sometimes it's not so great. And sometimes it's scary. And sometimes it's really troublesome. And so it's important for us to understand there's always a reason that behavior is happening. And it always has to do with some kind of demand they're facing and the inability to find the skills they need and access the skills they need to handle it in a different way. Next slide, please. So we have 3 phases in the approach. Like we said, we're going to make in this situation, depending on how urgent the situation is, we're going to assess what's happening. We're going to make a plan. We're going to act. We can go to the next slide. So we always do want to be as proactive as we can. Our model is very much based on let's prevent as many of these escalations as possible. Without question, that is very important. If we can prevent people from escalating, we can prevent that chronic cycle of trauma that you learned about earlier this morning. We won't be in that hamster wheel of having them re-trigger and re-trigger and re-trigger. And so yes, getting ahead of it is ideal. And practically speaking, we know that's not always completely possible. So we want to present to people how you can actually utilize the concepts of the model to prevent escalation from going all the way up to peak, if at all possible. So in that yellow zone, how you can interact with students in a way that really hopefully can get them back down to the green zone again. And then if they do happen to escalate all the way up to peak, how you can utilize emergency collaborative problem solving to try to help them de-escalate in a trauma-informed, compassionate way, as opposed to continuing to push, and have them get to a point of out of control. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and you can pop right through it. We're going to gather some information, and in doing that, what we're doing is we're looking at those 3 components of that equation of behavior that we just talked to you about. We can see the behavior, we hear the behavior, or we experience the behavior. We don't want people to stop there. We want to walk back and think, what is the triggering situation here? And in a green zone proactive way, we're asking educators, are you seeing patterns? Are you seeing this consistently challenged with This child is having trouble consistently getting started on their writing assignments. This child is having trouble consistently coming in from recess in that line and keeping their body safe in line and things like that, right? What you're seeing them being having trouble with, then we want to identify what's the demand on them, what's that situation, and then always ask ourselves, okay, and I know the reason they're struggling is because they must be struggling to access some of their skills needed to be able to do better in that situation. Next slide, please. So when we say we're going to make a plan, we talk about the 3 plans. Now, keep in mind, plan A and B and C all pursue different goals. When we use plan A, it is our adult will that we are creating a situation where we're removing their ability to a privilege or something like that. So for example, a child who struggles to come in from recess every day and stay safe in line, we might plan A it by saying, you need to hold the teacher's hand or be right next to the teacher as you walk in. You're not able to stay in line like the other kids for now because you're not able to be safe. So I don't want you to confuse plan A with a response to a behavior. Plan A is about structuring things in an adult-driven way to be able to just remove the possibility of that person having that incident. Plan A doesn't always work. Plan A isn't a guarantee that behavior is going to improve, and Plan A actually causes stress. So we want to reduce the use of Plan A as much as possible, but it is a part of the model for a reason because sometimes while we're trying to work on other things, we might need that in place. Plan C is where we actually reduce demand. So we might take away or eliminate some of our expectations or change them significantly to try to make them more accessible. And then plan B is where we are working together collaboratively to problem solve with students to come up with solutions to real life situations that are hard for them that might help. First of all, it helps them build skills, it helps build relationships, it helps come up with real life solutions to try that ideally in the long run are going to help empower kids and adults to be able to try things differently and hopefully ideally help kids meet expectations on a lot more consistent basis. Go ahead and to the next slide, please. So when we talk about in the ACT part, we're going to talk about Plan B. It's problem solving. It is going to pursue improving those. The act itself of problem solving actually helps youth and adults, by the way, practice thinking skills. Those 5 categories of thinking skills that I talked with you about, those are all being practiced in the process of problem solving. So it strengthens relationship and it's very empowering. So it's very trauma informed because it allows that voice, it allows that participation in the process, but it doesn't ask the youth to participate alone. It's very much a collaboration between the adult and the youth, which doesn't let them flounder if it's hard because we can help them just enough as we go through the process. Next slide, please. So there are 3 ingredients, we call them, within Plan B. We always start with empathizing because empathizing is the core to regulation. So people start to heal and relax as soon as they feel heard and understood and connected with. And the empathize ingredient is about connecting, listening, to understand, not just listening to give intellectual knowledge to what's happening, but to really put yourself in that youth's position of why this particular situation is hard for them. We're going to share our perspective with them about why it's important to us that they stay safe or that this learning expectation is important to us because we hope they learn A, B, or C, right? And then we're going to work together to see if can we brainstorm a solution that will help us both have what's important to us addressed with the solution. Next slide, please. And just quickly about the 3 ingredients, they're going to look very different in that regulated proactive green zone. In the yellow zone, if we've got a trigger that's just happened, we're going to definitely dive into empathizing. We might not and it's going to be about the specific situation as it's happening right now. We might not spend a lot more of time in the share and collaborate. And in emergency, it's going to be predominantly about empathizing so that our primary focus in that that peak escalation is going to be to help de-escalate before we try to get anything else accomplished. So the benefits of collaborative problem solving, we know that it strengthens relationships. That's the goal of intervention that you're going to see a change in first and foremost, which is going to have an extremely positive impact on school climate. It helps build those cognitive thinking skills that we talked about. It absolutely will help reduce the need for some of these really harsh responses to behavior that we've been talking about for most of the morning. Next slide, please. We have we don't have to be clinicians to use this. As a clinical social worker, I teach parents how to do this. I have taught dozens, more than dozens, many, many, many educators of all positions in schools. We have schools that we work with that have trained every staff person in their school, no matter what their job is, whether it be someone who's serving food to the children, can really engage in this spontaneously when something comes up in the cafeteria, for example. It does not have to be just educators in classrooms, as far as teachers and instructional assistants that are using it. It absolutely can be anyone interacting with youth. It provides you a structure and a framework to take action on. It's very, very neurobiology based because our empathize ingredient is the key to regulating, and we don't really have access to the rest of our brain until we're regulated to share and then collaborate. So it's very much founded in neurobiology. And it is for that reason, because we're building skills and we're regulating youth. It is very much going to reduce challenging or undesired, I should say, undesired behaviors. We're going to see a lot more ability to comply and a lot fewer stress-related behaviors. Next slide, please. So when we think about take-home points, just as part of this approach, the adult staying regulated, I really appreciated the previous presentation about tools to help the adult feel safe, because keep in mind, dysregulation is contagious and regulation is contagious. And so as much as we can stay grounded and regulated when we're working with our youth, is going to be helpful for them. Being able to empathize and truly being curious is going to help them regulate. When we invoke our power and authority, whether it's through the use of Plan A or any other power over kind of intervention, we should expect that to be very dysregulating. And that's something that we need to very much be keeping in mind. And that the principles behind what we're doing here are very much trauma informed, because we are going to be pursuing helping these youth comply with expectations and be able to behave, but in a very safe, relational, and collaborative way. Next slide, please. So we do have these different services at Think Kids that you're going to get these slides, so I'll let you look at those more in depth later. Next slide, please. We have some books for you. Specifically, the School Discipline Fix is highly applicable here. And then the guide that you see on the right is very helpful as like a quick glance resource for you. Next slide, please. And then here's a QR code, and you can find out a lot more about collaborative problem solving on our website. And last slide. Thank you so much for having us here today. I appreciate it. And good luck to all of you as you move through and try to figure out how you're going to navigate these new, very helpful regulations that are going to hopefully improve school climate dramatically.
Thank you very much, Heather. And I just want to point out to everyone attending that each of these presentations could have been for the full morning, that there's so much valuable information. And so you can certainly reach out to individual vendors and check out websites and materials. We now are going to move to Dr. Lori DeSatels, the Revelations in Education. She has served as an assistant professor at Butler University since 2016, where she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in the College of Education. Prior to this, she spent 8 years as an assistant professor at Marian University in Indianapolis, where she founded the Educational Neuroscience Symposium. Now, in its 16th year, the symposium has reached thousands of educators across the country. Lori is passionate about engaging students through the lens of social and relational neuroscience as it applies to education. She integrates the Tier 1 trauma accommodating, trauma accommodating applied educational neuroscience framework, along with its principles and practices into her coursework at Butler University. In 2016, Lori created the Applied Educational Neuroscience Certification Program to support educators, counselors, clinicians, and administrators working with children and adolescents experiencing adversity or trauma. This certification is now a global program and has reached hundreds of educators worldwide. Welcome to Lori.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. I am very honored to spend a few minutes with you. And I do want to share, first of all, that even though I'm teaching at Butler and I'm presenting across the world, my number one priority is to be in classrooms. And I took a course release 14 years ago and went back to the classroom 2 mornings, 2 afternoons a week. And I say this today because I had to be on the ground level. I could not develop these translations and applications of research without being in the classroom and co-teaching. So everything I'm sharing with you today is not only my last 14 years in the classroom co-teaching in various districts, pre-K through high school, but it's also I'm a former special education teacher. I taught children with the classification of emotional disabilities. And in the early 90s, we knew so little. I'm also a former school counselor, and this is on the ground work, and I'm just super excited to share this. So I'm going to begin by this statement, and that is that our adult bodies, carry the stories of our childhood nervous systems, and this matters in our schools because so many of us, whether we are educators, social workers, counselors, behavioral specialists, administrators, whatever our role, whoever sits beside children, we carry in adversity. We carry in the trauma that we've experienced and have unconsciously embedded into our nervous systems. And therefore we get triggered, we get activated. And so the newest part of the work, which I'll speak to a little bit this morning, is autonomic nervous system levels of support for adults. So think of it as in the United States, many of us are familiar with MTSS for adults, because this is where we're not just picking off leaves, we are really reaching for the root. And so anyway, we're gonna continue. Next slide. I was in Kansas City, and this was a couple of years ago, speaking to administrators from across the state, and this came to me. A student's behavior isn't about me. They're not doing this to me. It's a symptom, like a sneeze showing us a cold, a cut with a wound, or a scab showing us healing. This behavior is signaling that the nervous system is rough, and we say that in our house. Can we become curious? What is underneath this behavior? And then a question that was asked of me 16 years ago by our oldest son's freshman Spanish teacher when Andrew was going through significant behavioral challenges, which underneath that, didn't know then, but just this extremely fragile nervous system. So next slide. As Mona Delahook so beautifully shares, behavior is only a signal and it's a symptom. And when we're only looking at a behavior, it's like looking at an aerial view of water and describing it factually, but yet we can't because we don't know what lives beneath that water. We don't know the environment that supports the water. We don't know the content of the water. And I can honestly say to you that I am studying my behavior right now, I think more than anyone else. I'm really delving in to my own activators, to my triggers, and sharing that with the adults that I sit beside in the United States and across the world. So next slide. So we are no different than the children and youth that we serve. And I just want to celebrate this morning that our nervous systems know how to protect us. And I liked what Guy shared. I listened to a few minutes, and he talked about carrying a trauma load. And not only do our children and adolescents come in carrying significant adversity, and I'm going to talk about trauma logic in just a minute, but we do too, and this is where, we can just below consciousness, subconsciously, we can feel so overwhelmed, so fatigued and burned out. And I want to not just normalize that, but celebrate that we have these nervous system states that are filled with wisdom. Your fight flight response it holds ancient wisdom. It protects you. And when we learn how to befriend our nervous system and we learn how to listen to our bodies, and that is the golden nugget, then we begin to shift, and our children and our adolescents sense it and feel it, because we are sensing creatures, feeling creatures. So celebrate the wisdom when we are feeling, when we can honestly name it and say, I'm not okay, then I want all of us to know that this deep embodied awareness is healing. It moves us from states of protection into states of growth. Next slide, or next signal. So these are the 4 pillars of the applied educational neuroscience framework. And I just have to tell you, they have wings of their own. This is not a program. This is not something you purchase. It's not another initiative. It really supports us personally, first and foremost. I am a different mom today than I was to Andrew and Sarah and Reagan when they were little. This supports me as a professor, as a wife, as a friend. And so I'm going to go through these briefly, but I'm going to change this first one to say the adult nervous system, because it's not just about the educator. I want to speak to parents and caregivers and all of us who sit beside children and adolescents that are carrying in significant adversity. And knowing that trauma is not big T trauma or little t trauma, it happens on a spectrum. So we go first. And this is why behavior management or classroom management is not about kids. And I'm not going to say none of us, but most of us were not trained to understand that. We were not prepared, not trained. We weren't prepared. And so, I don't know, in 16 minutes, what can I say today? But this is why MTSS, or autonomic nervous system levels of support for adults, is so critical right now. We've got to reach the adults who are serving children, and to validate and to affirm. So all the practices you're hearing today are as much for us as they are for the children and youth that sit beside us. Co-regulation has become a buzzword, and I'm kind of irritated with it a little bit. But I want to share that it is our biological priority. We are social creatures. Our brains are social organs, and we can't survive without each other. And last night when I was presenting to Kansas, I want to read a quote to you about co-regulation, and it's from the Science of Psychological Safety. And I think it's just beautiful. The science of psychological safety can be described as being in a space where we are with someone who is steady. I don't like the word calm, or grounded. Someone who relates to us without judgment and has and carries to us a depth of compassion. We are then empowered to meet ourselves in the exact same way. And that's really what we want when we think about co-regulation. I am ready for co-regulation to be literally rooted in our state and country's discipline protocols. It is that critical. Touch points are micro moments of connection. Our kids are reading us. And I did a podcast yesterday morning with Penny Williams, and she was saying, Lori, our neurodivergent kids sometimes don't read nonverbal, but we both agreed that through our faces, through our tone, through our gesture and posture, they can read energy. We all read energy. And so when we think about the power of these touch points, these happen all day long. They're not scripted. And we have some touch points that we share that are purposeful and intentional, but it's the way we greet each other. It's how we exit. It's how we transition. It's how we validate. And then you can see the leaves are turning on the tree here. This is the language of the nervous system. This is a new season. And this language of the nervous system is sensation. And think of sensation as physical feelings. They are actually the feelings that we experience in the body, which I've never really described it like that, but this is something I'm thinking about. And we're sharing this not only with students, but with staff. And our little ones are so fluent. It's our 3-year-olds, our 2-year-olds, our 4-year-olds, our 5-year-olds who know this language, but we get conditioned out of our nervous systems, out of our bodies, as we get older. And especially in education, we are so cognitive centric focused. We lecture, we talk, we problem solve, and so many of us and the children and youth that we serve are not there. Next slide, please. So this is, and again, I'm not sharing anything you all don't know, but I want to emphasize the research beneath this. Social medicine is fundamental to our well-being, and I just shared in the previous slide why. What is the worst punishment you can give human beings that negatively impacts their biology and literally changes brain architecture? Next slide. Restraint and seclusion wreak havoc on nervous system health. Solitary confinement, isolation creates social deprivation, and we are social animals, and our social behaviors help us to survive. Social deprivation is a massive stressor on the human body and keeps our stress systems in persistent states of activation, resulting in the overproduction of cortisol and adrenaline, which damages brain tissue. Next slide, please. So I want to speak for a minute on what our kids and what many of us are carrying in to our classrooms, to our organizations, to our carrying into our homes. Trauma and adversity is when sensory information comes in too much, too fast, too soon, sometimes for too long, sometimes for too little. And so what happens is that when we experience adversity and trauma, the nervous system is unable to metabolize and digest such overwhelming experiences. And a day later, a month later, a year later, 10 years later, 50 years later, we are left with these fragmented implicit memories. These are body memories. They don't feel like a memory. But this is what we see in our classrooms oftentimes that we misunderstand because we're only looking at the behavior. And so what would a fragmented implicit body memory look like? It could be an intrusive image that throws us. It could be a physical reaction. It could be really a rush of sensation. And I think that's what we can all really relate to. It can be a smell, a sound, a taste. They're unique to each person. And these fragmented memories need a voice and they need to be restoried. And that is a part of self-agency that so many of our children and adolescents are just literally so thirsty and hungry for in our schools, which many act as community centers, can be the place where we can sit beside our children and youth and help them to restory the adversity and trauma that has impacted their nervous systems. Next slide, please. What is trauma logic? This is what we often punitively address. So I just want to read. We all carry trauma logic. Every single one of us in here. Think about your own. So in 6 minutes that I have left, let's just take a look at this. It's logical to not trust adults at school if every adult in your developing years has mistreated or neglected your biological needs. It's logical to run from a space where you hear a loud noise or a smell that's similar to the time of a traumatic event. It's logical to yell and fight and defend yourself if your perceived survival is at stake. And it's logical to appease adults and say what you think they want to hear and hope she'll be left alone. And it's logical to numb yourself if your perceived anxiety is overwhelming. I am not condoning these behaviors. Please understand that as an educator, as a former educator and being in classrooms, we have to be able to teach. And we are pressured right now with so many initiatives. And we are in the season of testing. But we have to become aware of what is beneath this behavior. So I have 5 minutes left, and I made some notes that I want to share with you. When we think about the applied educational neuroscience framework, those 4 pillars are conveying to all of us as parents, as caregivers, as educators, that discipline is not about reactionary consequences. Discipline is how we start the day. It's our procedures. It's how we start a morning in our classroom. That's discipline. It's how we build engagement. It's using focused attention practices, using our breath, using movement, using music, using pressure, touch, temperature change. And so these practices, whether we take 5 minutes or 10 minutes, how we exit, how we leave, these are discipline practices that are preventative, that are nervous system aligned, and they are relational. And so in our work in applied educational neuroscience framework, we are really focusing on the adult nervous system. And we have created a ladder of embodied awareness and plasticity that I am beginning to share and teach. And I want to just share this quote from this ladder. And it's just so powerful. The tired, anxious, overwhelmed adult will almost always see a tired, anxious, and overwhelmed child or adolescent. The hopeful, inspired, and steady adult will almost always see the possibility and clear vision of a hopeful, inspired, and steady child or adolescent. We know that not only emotions are contagious, but cortisol and oxytocin are contagious. So cortisol leaks from the skin when we are in close proximity to one another. The same with our other chemical messengers. And this is one of the practices. We are helping our children and youth. And on my website, there are hundreds of practices that you can choose from. But we are teaching them that they're chemical messengers. There are 5 of them that really drive how they feel, how they sense, how they move throughout the world, how they behave. And I want to say to all of you today that our children and adolescents continually and consistently say, "You mean I'm not a bad kid? You mean there's nothing wrong with me? That my nervous system has learned how to protect me." This is getting to the root of this work. It's not what we do to kids. It's not the strategy that we are actually implementing. It's giving them agency and autonomy. And it's giving them the science. We are teaching our kids the language of the nervous system. My first graders know what dopamine is, and serotonin, and oxytocin, and adrenaline, and cortisol. And this is so empowering. And this helps us to restore. So my website, I didn't even make a slide to share any of this, but my website is revelationsineducation.com. We have this amazing certification at Butler. Applications are open for another few weeks. You're with me for 11 months. I have 1 minute. And we just developed a new master's program that we're not developed. It's being developed right now. And it is in this work. It is rooted in applied educational neuroscience. And it's a master's that is not theoretical or abstract. It really reaches into the application, the practices, and the translation of this work. So please follow me on social media. I'm posting all the time on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, everywhere. And I was honored to share today. And you'll find my Butler email too on the website. And thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lori, for that incredible presentation and such valuable resources. We will now hear from the Regulated Classroom. Emily Reed Daniels is an author and creator of The Regulated Classroom. The Regulated Classroom has sold more than 45,000 copies and has been shipped to more than 500 U.S. cities and 13 countries. Daniels is set to release another guidebook in May of 2026, co-authored with Christy D'Agostino, called The Early Years, a play-based guide to co-regulating with young children. Daniels and her work have been featured in the Associated Press, Fox News, ABC News, Los Angeles Times, and NPR. Daniels holds a master's in education and school counseling, an MBA in organizational environmental sustainability, and is a nationally certified counselor through NBCC, the National Board of Certified Counselors. She continually refines her understanding of the applied science of stress and trauma through training in varied modalities, including somatic experiencing, SMART, which is sensory motor arousal therapy, trauma-informed sensory modulation, Reiki, and mindfulness-based stress reduction. Welcome to Emily.
Hi, can you all hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up, Megan, so I can see that you, or Jennifer? That'd be great. Thank you. Thanks. I just want to make sure that you can all hear me. Thank you so much. I want to first thank the DLC and Emily Lamarca for inviting me to participate in this conference. Emily, I listened to your story, your personal story this morning, and was just honestly so moved by it. It just really helps to enliven the passion that I already possess about the importance of finding a different way today. You know, I have formerly was a school counselor myself, and that's actually what drew me into this body of work. And I became a trauma-informed schools consultant 9 years ago when I went out on my own. And from that work, I developed the Regulated Classroom. So it's my great honor to share this with you and your audience today. And I hope that it will be meaningful for those who are joining me for this brief bit of time. I will just say that typically when I train, I'm a very experiential trainer, meaning that I like to integrate the practices that I teach other people to use. And so I struggle in a webinar format because I like to see others, to see the facial cues of others at least, or to be able to read chats. And so a webinar format is a little challenging for me. If you could proceed to the next slide, please, that would be great. So the first thing I want to say here, and I just hope that you can take this in for a moment as an adult who is listening to this, or perhaps you're an educator or you're a parent yourself, I just want to say that you matter so much. And when I say that, what I mean is that you matter so much to the children's lives and the teens' lives that you touch on a daily basis. And as a school counselor, I didn't really feel as though that message was ever relayed or conveyed to me. In fact, when I would often go to my administration to talk about the ways in which students struggled or staff struggled, and in particular, when I talked about watching staff shudder under the pressures of expectations that they were faced with, the expectations to get every student performing and every student on grade level and every student, being proficient on their standardized tests and whatnot. A lot of times I would return to administration and say, like, the reason why this teacher is struggling with this student is because the student is presenting in a challenging way. And our expectations are rigid, and we don't support this teacher with how to address these challenges, or in ways that really moved the needle anyways. And oftentimes what was reflected back to me from administration is, we're here for the kids and we don't matter, only they matter. And I just want to debunk that and say, no, you matter. And the reason you matter is because we are instrumental in that developing child's life, whether that is a young child or a school-age child or a teenager. Our presence, and in particular, if we can have a regulated presence, is hugely formative for that that child's experience with us. So can you please proceed to the next slide? Thank you. So the first thing that I want to just acknowledge is that this work today is very challenging, meaning parenting today is very challenging. Just wrote a whole book about that. But also being in education today is very challenging. And I believe that there is a direct correlation between stressed, overwhelmed, and even traumatized adults working with stressed, dysregulated students and the propensity to using restraint and seclusion practices. There is in my opinion, there is a correlation between these two things. And I'm going to explain why that is from a nervous system perspective. But teachers report the second highest rates of occupation-related stress. And parents are also incredibly stressed. 41%, in fact, report being unable to function on a daily basis because they are so stressed. So, science helps us to understand that the adults in the developing child's life are critically important. And when we, the adults, are not doing well, that has a direct impact on our children. I'm going to explain a little bit in specific ways. For the next slide, please. Okay, the question comes, why? Why are we so stressed? Why are the educators so stressed? Again, in another moment, I could explain why parents are so stressed, but for right now, I'm just going to focus on why it is that the educators report such high levels of stress. This was the case pre-pandemic, but obviously the COVID and the pandemic and lockdown and all the ways in which our social lives were deeply disrupted has resulted in an amplification of disruptive and aggressive student behavior. And as you all know, and for the presenters I was able to listen to before, everyone's kind of touching on this or talking about this, that we have dysregulated students that can present in ways that are frankly threatening, right? And so this is where we start to dig into understanding this behavior through the lens of the nervous system. And I'm a polyvagalist, which means that I see that through the lens of protective reactions versus connective regulated states, right? So student behavior and challenging student behavior remains the number one source of stress for educators today, okay? But there are also these others, which is low pay, the feeling that they have to support everything nowadays. They're not just the teachers, delivering content or curriculum for academic skills. They have to be sort of the social worker and the counselor and the mental health support. And they're overwhelmed by that very broad role they play. A lot of them talk about not feeling that they are adequately supported by their administration. One of the things I always say when I talk about that in training is that I've also worked a lot and extensively with administrators. They are a very lonely group. They get it from all sides. So of course it makes sense that they are under-resourced to adequately support their staff, and the staff feel that. And then you have, of course, the crisis of staffing shortages, which again was an issue pre-pandemic and then just amplified post-COVID. So there's a lot of reasons here why our educators are so stressed today. And Massachusetts enjoys among the worst rates of morale in their teaching staff. So it's kind of ironic if you think about it, because Massachusetts also enjoys a very high ranking in terms of educational outcomes for their public education students. But you have staff and teachers that are not happy in their workplace. And having worked in Massachusetts, I myself am born and raised in Massachusetts, attended public school, K to grade 12 myself. I'm a graduate. I can tell you that having worked there now with clients and districts there, that is very much, anecdotally speaking, very much confirmed that people are not happy working in their jobs in the state of Massachusetts. And these reasons and others are the primary drivers for that. If you can proceed to the next slide. So I want you to start thinking about, what have these conditions done to our educators, done to us from a nervous system state perspective? So when people are in jobs where they don't feel supported, where they don't necessarily feel valued, where they're maybe even having to deal with threatening circumstances on a daily basis, what does that do to them? Proceed to the next slide, please. I want you to notice here that, and I bring this slide into every training that I host, and I want you to notice here that you have a picture of World War I, and in particular, trench warfare. And I often ask staff in the training to raise their hand if they've ever thought of their work or talked about their work as working in the trenches. And inevitably, there's always several hands that go up. And I know that that's exactly the language I used in my 20s when I first started in the career of education, working in the city of Wilmington, Delaware, in the projects in the city of Wilmington, Delaware. And it was a very vulnerable school, it was a very vulnerable setting, high crime, high addiction rates, high poverty. And I would often say that my work was in the trenches. But I did not know, nor did I understand nervous system states at that time. That was not part of my graduate training. And I didn't even realize how accurate what I was saying really was, because our students were surviving day in and day out in those living conditions. And therefore, when we worked with them, we also adapted to survival states. The adults adapted to being in survival states. And again, I'm talking about a nervous system state perspective here. Next slide, please. I really thought that was going to be a different one. It's okay. So the next one. I've taken the work of Dr. Stephen Porges, who's provided me with guidance over the years in his theory to make sure that I accurately convey the tenets of his theory. But I have a little play here with his the ways in which he talks about nervous system states. Usually when you see Dr. Porges's work and when he's talking about the different states, he organized them from an evolutionary perspective. And what you'll see here with me is that I have instead organized them from a mobilization or arousal perspective in the nervous system, because people need to be able to see this sort of thing, I think, in those terms. So in the middle, you'll see little man here. I call him ventral vagal man. And he's like walking along and he's kicking it up his shoes, his feet, his heels. And when we're in a ventral vagal state, which is a state of the nervous system, we are regulated. Our physiology is regulated. It's our heartbeat is somewhere between 60 and 80 beats per minute, right? We've got some nice blood pressure happening, some nice respiration, all is at ease. And so when we are in a ventral vagal state, physiologically speaking, we are in a state that is optimal for both teaching and learning, okay? It's also a spontaneous prosocial behavior. And having been somebody who taught, and I do mean taught, coping skills for years with students, this is a very different way to think about the kinds of behaviors that we wish to see in the classroom, right? Because a lot of times when we are struggling with student misbehavior, aggression, disrespect, whatever you want to call it, we have been taught to think that that's about a lack of skills. And people use that language. But in a polyvagal nervous system perspective, it's actually a dysregulated state in service of protection. So you'll notice that there are two sort of ways in which to either get defense mobilized or defense immobilized in my graphic here. And you got fight flight, which is what can happen when we get triggered by something in our experience, in our environment, or in our relationships around us. Something triggers us into a protective defensive state, which can look like, and very common in schools, anxiety. Okay. So we might be coming in for a new day. It's a Friday. We're looking forward to the weekend. We step over the threshold of our school, and all of a sudden, there's something in our experience in that moment that triggers us into an anxious state. And now we're feeling hypervigilant. Now we're noticing that our heart rate has increased. Our physiology is shifting towards protection. or in service of protection. And that is going to directly impact our ability to be a safe, present adult for anybody that we come in contact with. Why? Because it's going to automatically shift our realm of social engagement. Our expressions are going to change. Oftentimes, in defense mobilization, you're going to start to see some expression of the face that looks more anxious, agitated, irritated. You know how that is, where you can be walking along and you see somebody, and you're like, oh gosh, it looks like something's going on for them right now. I wonder what that might be. They didn't say anything, but you're reading it from the cues that exist in the realm of social engagement. Or you could step over the threshold of that morning. And I joke about this, and we'll joke about this for a moment because it's Massachusetts we're talking to here. And you get triggered into a state of defensive immobilization. What does that mean? That means whatever. I don't care. Oh, you want to talk to me like that? I don't care. That's fine. You do what you want. You do you, girl. Right? So you can either, your nervous system states can shift in either of service of defense mobilization, fight, flight, right? And you see that with the kind of like the increasing ladder there. Or it can shift into defense immobilization, which is a dorsal vagal state. And when we go into that state, we shut down, we get numb, we don't care. It doesn't matter. Do what you want. It's fine by me, right? And one of the things that I say in my trainings is these two states that are states of protection, this is the burnout crisis in education. This is the stress overwhelm crisis in our adults today. This is what our kids are encountering when they walk over the threshold of school every day, is an abundance of adults around them that are in some state of protection instead of being in a state of connection. Why? Because there are all these conditions that overwhelm the adults. And when we get overwhelmed, we adapt. And the adaptation that is made from an evolutionary perspective is one of survival. Okay. So I try really hard when I'm training people to help them to understand that, like, you're not a failure. You've just adapted beautifully to the most common condition you're encountering on a regular basis. That's like what we're made to do from a biological perspective, right? We're an incredibly resilient species, which means we are capable of adapting to our most frequent and repetitive experience. But that does not always mean that it's in service of connection, balance, healthy relationships, right? It can be instead in service of protection, conservation of energy, imbalance in the body, but is still keeping us safe. Okay. Next slide, please. You might be thinking I'm exaggerating, that I'm overstating it, but I want you to take a look at what does this look like in a behavioral presentation. And I want you to in particular be thinking about the adults. So what does a fight presentation look like? Does that mean that staff are coming in every day literally fighting kids? No, but they might be arguing with them. They might be easily agitated by them. They may be more quick to move to a restraint or seclusion practice as a result of feeling that defensiveness. Because when we do those things, when we engage in those kinds of ways of being with our students, we have to recognize that that is like oftentimes comes from a place of, I don't want to say judgment because that sounds very conscious. I would actually say it comes from a place of response, right? And that response can either be one that's in conscious and intentional response, which is very challenging to have when you are encountering an escalated circumstance. It is really, really hard. Hear me out. It is really, really hard for us to bring our full conscious capacities to a highly escalated circumstance, which is what often results in restraint and seclusion. Okay. From a biological perspective, there just isn't anything more challenging. We just go through a few more of these survival behaviors, and then we're going to start turning the tide because we're in Sucky Town right now, my friends, right? We're going like, how are we ever getting out of this? this cycle of, and this is the cycle I explained, which is we've got dysregulated students perhaps coming into school, meeting with dysregulated adults, or meeting a dysregulated adult or adult that's in survival state. That triggers the student that's already dysregulated into more survival. And now we've got a positive feedback loop where we're just mutually defense mobilizing each other or defense immobilizing each other. And so you're going to see things like fight behaviors, high anxiety, or flight behaviors where students and or teachers are avoiding one another, avoiding certain circumstances, avoiding the staff room, leaving work early, coming to work late, calling out sick all the time, or freeze. And by the way, survival states can be a constant fluctuation between these presentations. So it's not somebody's like always just fight or always just flight, but it's a way in which to, like, these kinds of work behaviors in the past we would have seen as lack of engagement at work or maybe poor morale, but we would not have seen it through the lens of the nervous system. Right? We may have seen it even as a deficiency in the part of the adult, like they're lazy or they don't care anymore. They don't care about their job anymore. They just take it for granted, right? And there's the freeze presentation of like checked out, dissociated, apathetic, whatever. Very Massachusetts, right? These are all survival presentations, okay? And again, can be really appropriate given a certain circumstance. But the problem becomes in our schools, or the problem that we have in our schools, is when this becomes more our default way of being in school than not, right? When we don't have an abundance of ventral vagal energy, it's going to make things really hard for everybody. We, the adults, set the tone in the schools. We set the tone for the kids. We 100% do. Next slide, please. So, what does this mean? Does this mean we got to teach more coping skills? No. Does this mean we got to work on skill? And I know this is contrary to what some others were saying. And, how do I say this? Everyone's work has its place. What I tend to focus on in the regulated classroom is root cause work. Okay. Why? Because I spent so many years working in a paradigm that was either cognitive in nature, i.e. skills deficit. Now we got to teach the skill, practice the skill, use the skill. That's very cognitive, or cognitive behavioral, or just straight behavioral. Okay. Those were always my orientations. That was my training. That's what I understood. So when I met polyvagal theory and met the field of somatic psychology and met the work of Dr. Peter Levine and met, understanding physiology and its relationship to behavior, I was like, bam, wow, this is a whole new way of understanding behavior. And more importantly, this is a whole new way of working on increasing pro-social behaviors, which is really what we want, honestly, because ventral vagal states, pro-social behaviors, these are the things that give rise to relationship building and repair, and also the ability to teach in a way that inspires curiosity, and for your students to be available to receive instruction, right? And to engage in instruction and to engage in curriculum. So what we're really looking at instead is the focus isn't on skills, the focus is on window of tolerance. And this is not a relational cognitive concept. This is a physiological concept. Next slide, please. We're at for time. Probably going on too long. Oh gosh, okay, I'll wrap it up. Okay. We grow and adapt in response to our most frequent and repetitive experiences. Next slide, please. So what does that mean? The question that we need to start asking ourselves is, what could we be providing in micro moments through repetitively and with great frequency throughout the course of the day that would help to reset our nervous systems into a ventral vagal state, into a pro-social state? Next slide, please. And that's exactly what I've developed in my framework is 4 core practices: connectors, activators, settlers, affirmations. These 4 core practices represent very specific qualities of experience that we know buffer stress and trauma and also support sequential growth and development. So connectors are primarily practices of play that build and repair relationships. Activators are forms of collective rhythm making so that we can sync up with one another. Both connectors and activators arouse the nervous system in service of connection instead of in service of protection. Settlers are practices that calm the body's physiology. Slow breathing, right? Slow heart rate, settle the body. As are affirmations. Affirmations are opportunities for us, the adults, to double down on positive associations in the moment with our students so that we're actively, consciously building a catalog of moments that are good and positive, like genuinely good. So it's not like a reward, it's not an affirmation in that way. It's not a praise. Well, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes it can be, but it's you praising the moment, you praising the experience for yourself so that you are doubling down on that positive association in the school environment. These core practices help us to grow, stretch our window of tolerance, physiologically speaking, because activators and connectors arouse the nervous system, hopefully within the range of resilience or window of tolerance, and the settlers and affirmations downregulate the body's arousal level. So as we arouse and settle, arouse and settle, arouse and settle in service of connection, recruiting the realm of social engagement, so amplifying cues of safety, right? We are building a sense of cohesion in the classroom environment, and we are physiologically speaking building our resilience to tolerate stress without it shifting us into protective states of either mobilization or shutdown. Next slide, please. There it is. What I just explained is how you can think of it in terms of the window of tolerance. Those black lines represent your window of tolerance. Once you bump outside of those things, now you're in defensive states that are either mobilized or immobilized. What we're looking to do is widen the window of tolerance so that we default less into modes of protection. We default less into interpreting student behavior as truly threatening that results in restraint and seclusion. Next slide, please. 90% of educators agree that they feel more connected and regulated when they use the tools and practices of the regulated classroom. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. I know I ran over on time a little bit. Apologize for that. Sorry, Emily. We are on the socials. You can find us on Instagram or Facebook, and also our website, regulatedclassroom.com. Please feel free to reach out and ask questions. I should also mention too that we have had the good fortune of working with some districts in Massachusetts who really get this. So I feel like folks need to know that this isn't things are starting to shift in Massachusetts, and it's very heartening to me to see that shift happening. So I just want you to know that, we have contracted with several districts there, and it's been extremely well received. And of course, we'd like to do more work with Massachusetts. Thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Emily. And now we're going to move to our last speaker, JRI. Corey is currently the Building Communities of Care Director at JRI. Corey is responsible for the oversight and implementation of the BCC curriculum across all JRI sites, which currently consist of over 30 sites and 125 trainers, as well as external training and consultation. Corey has been with JRI for just under 15 years, working in various administrative and leadership roles across multiple residential schools, as well as the director of the JRI COVID Isolation Unit. As an administrator in the residential setting, Corey focused on the training and development of staff to provide a safe and trauma-informed environment of care. Corey represents BCC at national conferences, and he has led multiple training initiatives and implementation teams to establish high standards of trauma-informed treatment within programs, both internally and through his role as a consultant. Welcome, Corey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm going to move very quickly. We have a hard stop at 1 o'clock today, so I want to make sure we get an opportunity to do that. So I apologize for moving through slides quick. I'm not going to talk extra fast. I'll just try to be very succinct in my wording. So a few things our students need to feel safe, supported, validated, to feel heard and seen, as you've heard a bit here today, in order to be able to learn and access the curriculum, build relationships with their peers and teachers, and develop new and current skills. Next slide, please. Perfect. Stress response. So this has been talked about a bit today. We've heard a lot about the fight, flight, freeze response. We've heard a little bit about the parasympathetic nervous system, so I won't jump into each one of these. I'd actually just like to do a little activity real quick. If people here can do me a favor and just close their eyes, just imagine that maybe you're driving down the highway, maybe on a nice sunny day. The last couple of days have been beautiful. You got the wind blowing. Maybe you're driving by the beach, the ocean, the water. You hear the waves crashing. It's nice and relaxing. And all of a sudden you look up and in your rearview mirror, you see lights. What happens to your body in that moment? My guess is a lot of you are going to say, well, my palms get sweaty. My heart starts to pump. I immediately tense up. And some other things that may kind of physiologically happen to your body. Then the next question I want to ask people with that is, did you choose for that to happen? You didn't. Your body had these physiological responses and reactions that you didn't dictate or choose to happen based on kind of your knowledge or experiences knowing what lights mean in a rearview mirror. The same thing happens for a lot of the individuals that we work with, but it could be the fact that they're asked to read aloud in front of a group. It could be the fact that they're struggling with peer dynamics or relationships. It could be the fact that they don't feel confident in material, a whole variety of things. It could be a smell or a noise or a gender of a teacher or the tone of a teacher that they take. Next slide, please. So here's some of the trauma responses. These are really kind of focusing a little bit more on adults. We heard a lot about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, so I'm not going to jump into those a whole much more. And it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody with flight is a workaholic or an overthinker. These are just some common traits or qualities that we might see as people maybe having responses in some of these specific areas. And the next slide is going to highlight some of the responses that we may see. And you can move to the next slide, please. Some of the responses we may see from kids in school. Yelling, screaming, using mean words, hitting, kicking, biting, a lot of the things that have been highlighted over here throughout the training and presentations today. Next slide. So really just want to think about, as everyone's highlighted, the psychological trauma, the why behind the what. It's not necessarily what an individual is doing, it's why it's happening, and really understanding what's driving or the root or cause of some of the behaviors or presentations or responses that you're seeing allows you to really intervene effectively. And we're going to talk about 3 ways that we can look at behavior today. Next slide. One thing I do want to highlight is we also want to look at stage, not age. Yes, we have typical, developmental norms, quote unquote norms with certain stages in life. You think about developmental stages from being born to receiving a lot of nurturing support till you're growing and developing skills, till you can walk, till you can dress yourself, till you can start to eat, till you start to become a little bit more independent and take care of yourself a bit more. But not everyone receives the same level of support, the same feedback, the same background, or the need for particular skills. So oftentimes individuals are coming to us with a wide range in skill development. So we really want to oftentimes think stage, not age. Yes, sometimes you might have a middle schooler that's 13 or 14, but they may present as 8 or 9. Can we think about delivering information in a way that might be helpful or using visual cues that might meet that individual at their developmental stage versus their chronological age? Next slide, please. So what is BCC? It's really a culture change. We want to train caregivers to think about individuals differently through the lens of building communities of care. Next slide. The mission statement we have here is we want to teach all participants to provide trauma-informed, individualized, and strength-based interventions. That's the goal, as everyone's highlighted here. Everything that everyone's offering up is trauma-informed. And the first thing that I'd be willing, I'd share in my training is of all the menu of options and tools, nothing's going to be guaranteed to work. It's really about a relationship that you can build, what you can know and understand about individual. What are you aware of? What are you seeing and you noticing? Any tendencies, patterns that you can start to really kind of individualize and cater responses that are going to be strengths-based and meet them in ways that they need. Next slide, please. This is the model where we deliver the framework through, really looking at individual factors. Is anything specific with the individual? So that could be their hobbies, their interests, their likes, any religious values or views, any medical diagnoses, any learning needs or specialized supports in place for individuals that they may have. Community factors are really looking at that next layer. So for that would be all the schools, building your own community of care. What are you doing within the school, or what can you do within the school to provide those supports as a school, as a classroom, and for an individual, and kind of looking at those 3 lenses. And then external factors are really, how do we partner with things outside of our school? How do we partner with the families? How do we receive information if there's other services that are being provided? If they may go to a Boys and Girls Club or something after school. Do we have coordination or connection or relationships to see how they may present in other places and things that are helpful, successful, working or not? Next slide, please. And just an acknowledgement, as people have said a lot today, behavior is a form of communication, often trying to communicate needs. And the three needs we want to look at is connection, containment, and control. Attunement's a key factor in building successful relationships. People have really highlighted the need for proactivity. Yeah, as the restraints happen, it's too late. So we really want to think about, how do we set up our environments? How do we have structure, predictability, routines and rhythms within our classroom? How do we have routines within the routine, right? So we have the schedule of the day for potentially, class changes or going to lunch or recess. But what are the routines for that? How do we line up? Where do we line up? What are the expectations for that? Are there visual cues that everyone knows? Do the kids have an opportunity to be a part of that process and making some of those rules and expectations? How are they framed? Is it no, 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 or what you want to see individuals doing so that they're being able to highlight, what they're expected to do? Again, these strategies are presented in a menu. It's our job to individualize their usage and hopefully identify what's going to be the most effective. Next slide, please. So the rest of my slides for the next 5 minutes, these are just going to be a few examples. We're going to look at control, connection, and containment. We're going to look at what this may look like, how it kind of presents itself, some examples of that, and then ways that we could be able to respond and have some scripts around that as well. So really thinking about, as you can see on the slide here, offering choices, avoiding power struggles, reducing stimulation, so using the environment around you, whether that's lights, noise exposure to distractions, providing that safe, supportive environment, time in versus time out, and being able to build that connection. If somebody's needing something, is there a positive peer support? Is there something that they can do with you or another opportunity that they can receive some support? Next slide, please. And I won't read everything on the slide here, but here's examples for control. It often shows up as defiance, refusal, arguing, power struggles. It's really about past environments that might have been unpredictable or unsafe. Not all classrooms are run the same. Not all classrooms have structure and predictability. So how can you provide that within your classroom to have that routine where individuals can start to feel safe and comfortable, because that allows us to grow and develop and learn some new skills. What this can look like in the classroom: no to directions, arguing over rules, trying to get in power struggles, refusing to get involved with work, things that help, choices within structure, giving two choices, too many choices can be a lot, predictability, an adult staying calm and non-reactive, really managing our affect and how we respond in those tense moments, which that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. Next slide, please. And then some responses that we can have. So limited choices. Choices, 2 to 3 things. Choice isn't what do you want to do. That's too much. That's overwhelming and overstimulating for somebody that's maybe not regulated and not in control. Narrate expectations clearly. Sometimes less is more. Being clear, direct, not having a lot of verbiage. Sometimes I can definitely over talk. Sometimes just stating a very basic limit or expectation, what you're looking for an individual to do, and avoiding power struggles. Some examples you can see below. You can start with problem number 1 and number 3, your choice. You don't have to like it, but we do have to do it. I can help you get started. I'm not arguing. I'm here to help you succeed. So kind of reframing things in that positive way and giving control back to that individual if you can. Next slide, please. Next is containment. So oftentimes this is going to show up as dysregulation, impulsivity, emotional overflow. And when I say the word containment, I want to make sure that doesn't get misconstrued as seclusion or restraint, because that's not the goal of containment. Those would be the most extreme forms of that. Containment may be seating assignments or arrangements that you have in class, because that's going to be a little bit more supportive for some individuals than if they got to pick their own seats. Containment might be that we have people raise their hand before they speak, because too many people speaking out at once is going to cause a lot of chaos. Containment might be that we have people sign out before they go use a bathroom or something like that, so that we can be able to track who was out during times if something went along. Anything that's a little bit extra or in place that provides some support is going to be a level of containment. In the classroom, that might be a little bit of support, that might be writing things out or breaking things down a little bit more succinctly, things like that. So other examples of how this can look in the classroom, leaving seat repeatedly, yelling, crying, throwing items, just having physical agitation, meltdowns over what are perceived small things, things that help clear, calm boundaries, proximity, reduce language, and environmental structure. Next slide. You can actually skip the next 2 slides for me and move to one more. Perfect. Next one, please. Next slide. Perfect. The one back, if you don't mind. Take home, I want people to be able to pull away from that. These responses are not permissive, they're strategic. They're very intentional based on what we know about the individual. We really want to meet the need so that the behavior doesn't keep happening. So really kind of understanding why, not what. And just being able to develop a mantra: connect, contain, collaborate, regulate first, teach second. And if you can just slowly scroll through the next slides, these are just some visual examples of classroom supports, whether that's around seating, noise cancellation, tools on your pencils, things for transitioning from class to class that you can do in the hallway to focus on regulation, to be able to move, continue on as well to the next slide. This is an example of, a smart room or a sensory space, really being intentional. This one looks a little chaotic and messy. It's not just let people go in there and play everywhere. It's intentional with certain tools and how we use them for what need we're trying to meet with individuals. Next slide, please. Just visual examples of how we can help people understand what they do have options. So what can we do in the classroom? I think visual tools can be really helpful. Here's all the options that we can do when we have a problem or we're presented with a problem. And then the last slide, strengths-based. A lot of individuals are into video games. So how do we share examples of, regulation or highlighting that with things that individuals are interested in and pulling their interest in some of the things that we're trying to teach them. With that said, thank you very much. I know it's one-on-one. I went a minute over, so I do apologize about that. You can finish to the next slide and people can see my information there. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. And awesome for having us here today. And it was just a wonderful presentation by everyone. So thank you so much. I hope people were able to pull something from it.
Thank you, Corey. I really appreciate it. And clearly, everyone had a lot of really important information to share. And we will be sending out the video as well as contact information for all of the speakers today. And if anyone has questions, they can feel free to email either the email right there, mail@DLC, or just respond to the email you've got with the registration information. And we can't have enough information out there. There is an MCLE event on June 12th that's going to dive deeper into the regulations. But I look forward to continuing to collaborate with everybody. Thank you again.